school administration is thinking about anything, even giving them an off or whatever. The thought which should be on top of the head should be students or parents, because if we say students, then things would change a lot. If we say parents, because they are the one who would send the children.
Right.
So if we put students on top and not the parents.
Well, I want to have my input on this if you allow me.
Sure, just take the microphone. if you don't mind.
Well, to this question, what I think, because I'm also writing an institute, well, it should not be the student, it should not be the teachers, it should not be the parents, but the vision of the school which we design for, primarily for the students. So that should be the guiding principle to decide everything.
Right. I think I'm not saying we're listening to parents, but you have parents who come and say things like, we want this. But they're looking at it from their perspective solely. We're trying to say, we want you to say, yes, you want this, but is that also taking into consideration the needs and the strengths of your children? We don't want education to be an imposition, but we want it to be a consideration of the needs of students.
Do you have any case study with you before starting any Islamic school in the world that we gathered the community and we asked them and then they shaped the vision and they started the things and it works well? Any good case study you have that we haven't done? Like what I felt personally and what I saw in Islamic schools normally in the world, it started from the small group of the people who are more concerned about their children because they have to be in an Islamic environment rather than any conventional environment.
Right.
And they started. And then yes, when the journey started, so they shaped the things together. One thing, this case study. The second thing which I, the Asim asked this thing, if we will not, keeping in our mind that who do Islamic schools serve, that the parents are not our target audience in service, designing anything. So, like you already mentioned, that the major stakeholders and the major drivers for motivation of a student, they are the major drivers. Because Pakistan has a different, also issues now is challenging for us also, but the West is a problem because they have to motivate for their kids that you have to go to Islamic school. Sometimes you don't like it due to any certain reasons. So, we need parents also to be in line our vision with us. So when whatever we are designing, we also keep parents also in our mind, because sometimes it makes a problem. Even in, I want to take this your opinion also, this one, that because it has a pros and cons. For example, simple problem in Pakistan, we have Islamic schools available, and for example, there is 75% parents, they don't speak English at home. They don't know. For example, 75 parents, they don't know English, and your school is English medium school. It speaks English. Now they are unable to facilitate their kids at homework and things like that. So do we have to scrutinize screening criteria for parents in the time of admission, that academic qualification also one of the screening criteria while you are entering your kid there? This is the input I think what I want to also take about your input.
Thank you for the questions. I've seen some schools that have started a process like this, because if you're setting a vision for a school and then you're setting standards for teaching and you're setting standards for the school, I have seen schools that have done a 3, 6 month, 1 year process where they've gone through consultation with all key stakeholders, including parents and students and so on. And it takes time, right? And then they shape what they're looking for. But like you said, rightfully, most schools will start with a very small group. They'll have an idea, which is also not a bad idea, because you take that idea and then you present it to the parents and the student, and you get their feedback on it, and then you shape it.
Assalamu alaikum. Can I ask a question?
Sure. Let me I just wanted to finish that thought. So there are schools that have done it, and then I've also seen schools that have been established for 20 or 30 or 40 years, and they've gone back to doing that process, which is also very rich, right? So if your school, for example, doesn't have standards, or has standards, well, even if it has amazing standards, it should be a process of renewal constantly, where you are reviewing it trying to understand where it came from, what it's linked to, and what the implications of it are. And whose voices, when we talk about power and privilege, whose voices were there or not there, and what the, who is it that it's serving? I think it's an important question that you raised. Is it serving students or is it serving parents? Or is it serving both? And I still think, in my mind, for me, it serves students, but even parents are expected to look at it from their perspective, from a student's perspective. But, okay, we'll leave it at that. Sister, if you can go ahead.
Yes. I want to say that our studies, our vision should be student-centered because we are going to serve them actually. But parents should be involved in that so that they can provide the same environment at home. Otherwise, they will get distracted, confused, because nowadays in Pakistan there's an issue that East and West is mixed together. And parents are sending their students to Islamic school, but they are not following those things at home. They are totally confused and their personalities are so distracted that even they don't know what they are going to do. Should they follow school or their home or their parents? So we should instruct or direct their parents that if you are going to admit your child here, then you should also follow these things at home so that your child should get a focused and you can say goal in his life, and he must be able to know what he or she is going to do at the end. Otherwise the 12 years, as you said in the beginning, will be lost.
Right. These are very good points. I think the point that was raised here about English language, and this point here about parents almost reflecting the teachings that are happening in the school, in their home. One of the challenges we have, sisters, are you back and ready to start?
Yes, we are.
Okay, wonderful. I'm assuming sisters were ready 10 minutes ago. All right, so we are going to get into this idea of
We can't see you.
yes.
The multimedia is off, I think.
Can you see me now?
No.
This workshop is going to delve into this idea of Islamic pedagogy. Right? In front of you, you have a book called Principles of Islamic Pedagogy. This is a book that a colleague of mine and I, Sheikh Ramzi Ajam, in Toronto, had a chance to develop. I have to admit, Sheikh Ramzi wrote 95% of it, and he was gracious enough for me to put my name on it. The idea is that what we had discussed is this whole idea of standards that we've been talking about, is that we didn't feel Islamic schools had a set of standards of teaching practice that was rooted in the Islamic tradition. And when we said Islamic tradition, we meant the Quran, the Sunnah, the classical scholarship, and the contemporary scholarship, to answer the question that was asked earlier, that has been written about education in the Islamic tradition. We use the word Islamic tradition very broadly, and we said that there needed to be a set of principles and standards. We looked at a number of different texts that have been written, and as you know, there's a lot of texts that have been written about the teaching methodologies of the Prophet ﷺ. And for example, there was one book that we looked at with Sheikh Abdul Fattah al-Ghudda, who has written about the teaching methodologies of the Prophet. I think it was by Zamzam Publications from Pakistan, I think, and then translated, and there's new versions of it as well. The difference, I think, is what we have seen in the literature thus far, and again, it could be our analysis of it. But what we've seen in the literature thus far is we've seen hadith that have been pulled out of moments where the Prophet ﷺ, we could see a teaching lesson in how the Prophet ﷺ taught. So the Prophet would do something, and in that moment, there's a lesson that can be derived from it, of teaching. And in the texts on teaching methodologies that we've seen it's usually structured around grouping of hadith, grouping of different hadith. What we tried to do in this text, or what Sheikh Ramzi tried to do in this text, is something different. In that, if you take the hadith and you take the tradition broadly, and you look for principles, like you would in usul fiqh, you look for principles of rulings that come out. He started looking for what sort of principles can come out of this that would serve as the standards for our schools or for ourselves. It's very important to acknowledge that this is an attempt, not the attempt, right? All of us would probably look at this as scholars in this room, the richness in the scholars in this room and outside of this room would probably say, I think I would change it. I think we could add this. I think we could add that. But it's a, you see it as you have Islamic studies, and then you've got educational studies. So thus far, there's often been a divide. You're an Islamic studies teacher that understands Islamic studies, or you're an education teacher that understands educational studies. But there's nothing that aligns the two. So we said, we're not talking about Islamic studies, and we're not talking about educational studies, but we're speaking about Islamic pedagogy. And that's what we had to give it a term. We're speaking about Islamic pedagogy as a frame because it takes ideas and principles and perspectives of education from Islam, but it also is based on contemporary understanding of education and ideas of assessment and environment and student-centered learning and all of that. So it's not Islamic studies, it's not educational studies, but it's Islamic pedagogy, and we needed to give it a term. Now, what is pedagogy? We said pedagogy, the word pedagogy, has three key areas. Some would argue more, but the why, the what, and the how. And we said a pedagogy, like any philosophy of education, is based on why we teach, what's our vision, what's our values, why are we here. So when we spoke about purpose earlier, we spoke about whose lens are we looking at this through, whose purpose are we serving. That's all the why. This is the why we learn, what we learn, how we learn. So the why is the philosophy. And I give this example a lot. Many of you probably heard it and are sick of it, but I think it resonates with most of us because we understand it. So I give the example of Montessori schools. Right? Montessori is a philosophy. Maria Montessori had a philosophy of education. You and I know, if you were Montessori trained and you went into a Montessori school, you would know that this is an authentic Montessori school or an inauthentic Montessori school. Right? Because you read the philosophy of Maria Montessori. So you walk into a school and it's a Montessori school and you say that you're not even following the Maria Montessori philosophy. Or you are, because you know what the philosophy is. But if you don't have a philosophy, then how are you supposed to know that it's an Islamic school? Because thus far we said an Islamic school has Islamic studies in it. We've just focused on the content, which is the what. The what is the content. And I feel that for the past at least 3 or 4 decades of Islamic schooling, we've only been talking about the what. The what is, we rarely talk about the why. What is
Islamic pedagogy? Is Islamic pedagogy the umbrella term, and then why and what and how falls under it? Or is Islamic pedagogy the how, and Islamic education is the umbrella term?
Say that again. Islamic pedagogy is the umbrella term.
Okay.
The why, what, and the how are components of pedagogy,
Okay.
of any pedagogy, generally. So it's a good question. So if you're thinking of any pedagogy, the how, even the who the teacher is, but pedagogy, and we'll get into this when we get to the definition, but pedagogy is often defined as the art of teaching, the art of instruction. Okay? That's what the word pedagogy means, generally, conventionally. The problem with that is we assume that if I teach this way, however I teach, that I learn to teach in a vacuum, as though it came from nowhere. But a pedagogy, the reason why pedagogy is so rich is because even the art of instruction is based on a philosophy. Right? So the question. So that's why I'm saying there's a difference between if you take the text of Sheikh Abdul Fattah al-Ghudda on the methods of teaching of the Prophet ﷺ, and you just read the hadith. It's just a moment. It's a moment of instruction that's there, which is powerful. But that moment of instruction is rooted in something. What's the root? That's the philosophy part, right? So what I'm trying to say is that if for example, we say, I'm a student-centered teacher. Okay, what does that mean? Well, I use instructional methods like a think, pair, share. Okay, but your philosophy is telling you that you're a student-centered teacher. What are the implications of your philosophy? The implications of your philosophy is that I believe students have a voice. Students' voices are important, etc., etc. And then there's a set of beliefs and values that come out of it, right? If I believe that at the beginning of all my classes we should begin with some recitation of the Quran together in my class, let's say. That's part of my teaching methodology, but it also tells me that part of my philosophy is that I should begin with a recitation, not by myself or by one student, but all of us together for a reason, right? So a pedagogical practice is rooted in these three key aspects.
So it means methodology and pedagogy are the same things.
They're the same things. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that pedagogy, it's conventionally used as
Art of teaching.
the art of teaching. It needs to be considered more broadly, because it is within a pedagogy is the why, which we have to consider. Which is why earlier when I spoke about values and power and privilege, all of these are influencing our pedagogy. These are important questions to consider. Yes. The question was, am I putting why, what, and how into pedagogy, or are they? So the question was, sisters.
It's a request. Please use mics so that anybody asks any question, because we are unable to hear the questions from the.
Sure. So if they don't use the mic, I'll try my best to remember to repeat the question in case, because sometimes questions come up. They just come up. So that's okay. So the question was, am I putting why, what, and how into pedagogy as a framework, or is it generally embedded? And I'm saying it's generally embedded. See, the reason why this is, it's again, a very good question. There's a difference in education if you look at educational practitioners, people who are teachers in schools, and if you look at those that are looking at philosophies of education. When you look at researchers who write about philosophy of education, they would unpack pedagogy in its broadest sense. If you ask an ordinary teacher in school, they'll likely say pedagogy is about the art of instruction, it's how I teach. But if you push that teacher and you say, where did you get that? They'll tell you, I teach because I was influenced by, and then they'll go on, and that shapes their values. Right? I teach the way I teach because I was taught this way. I teach the way I teach because I read something. I was influenced by something. I saw something. I lived through a certain experience, and these values have shaped who I am in my teaching philosophy. Okay, so I just want to read through page 5 and 6, which talks about what is Islamic pedagogy and kind of reinforces some of the points we just said. So Muslim scholars, theologians, and jurists have a saying amongst themselves: "Let there be no disputing about terminology." It is vital at the beginning of any new study or investigation to define the terms before employing them, so as to avoid unnecessary dispute. The word pedagogy, before the 17th century, had a meaning closely related to its etymological connotation and has only achieved a common definition in the past 100 years of mass public schooling. In the classic history of pedagogy, the 19th century scholar Gabriel Compere states that older dictionaries define pedagogy as the moral education of children, and that today, not only in language but in facts and institutions, the fate of pedagogy is settled. From that point onwards to this very day, the term pedagogy has been commonly understood as the knowledge or art of teaching. Although it is sometimes used to refer to the field of study that deals with the method and practice of teaching, it is more commonly used to or referred to the very method and practice of teaching. As an example, in this sense, one could say the instructor's pedagogy reflects our principles and our aims of education. Okay, so I'll just repeat that. As an example, in this sense, one could say that instructor's pedagogy
But this is the difference between the document and the real-time implementation. By saying this is a document. Implementing is that you will not have teachers in the class. So that is why documents like these, they are like set aside. They're not being implementable because they don't make sense. If we have this kind of criteria, then there will be no teacher in the class. The school will not be there.
Right. That's just important. But we can't transfer it to practice. We have a major problem.
Then which means the document is not practical.
Either the document's not practical, or we haven't found a way to make it practical.
Because the whole system of the teacher induction, at least in Pakistan, I've
Yeah.
seen worldwide also, but I'm talking about Pakistan,
Yeah.
it won't work. There is no teacher education certification. There is, or very little. And 90% of the teachers are not
Yeah.
certified, and they're not real educational. They're there for an easy job.
Yeah. Which tells you that our role as people who are leading schools is far more important. Right? That doesn't mean, to me, that doesn't mean the document's not important. I think the absence of the document is highly problematic. If you don't have the it's like saying if you don't have the standards, the Pakistan standards, which no one seems to have seen, that's a major problem. But the absence of the standards is even a worse problem. How do you actualize the standards is a task for us as educators.
The document should be there. But it would stand again like the national standards on the side if it's not.
It can't be. That's the whole purpose of this workshop. It can't be. I'm saying that the national standards and this document and any other document you create for your school, first of all, has to be there. Secondly, it has to be a lived document, which is what I said at the very beginning. Is it a lived document? A lived document, now the question is for us as educators, how do we make it a lived document? Right? But I wouldn't say that we shouldn't have the document. Meaning, policy standards are important, and as we've shown, the Pakistan standards are actually pretty good, but no one's seen them.
I can see this document being implemented in Finland, but because the whole society has changed accordingly
Yeah.
because of the document. But
Yeah, I think that's a deficit way of looking at it.
May I interject something?
I honestly do. Just 1 second. I think. See, that's. I think to assume that somehow Finland's education system has a potential of living standards, and we don't. That's a deficit way of looking at it. I think we have to think to ourselves, how do we find a way to bring this into our schools? How do we build? I think so. Going back to my comment about maybe I was a bit harsh in saying that we don't want those teachers in our school. What I mean by that is we need to find a way to build capacity of our teachers globally, not just in Pakistan, but globally, and ourselves. And one thing that's lacking in our school systems, in our Islamic schools, is a lack of ongoing capacity building, ongoing learning. We've thought to ourselves, teacher ban gaye, go teach, done. That's not the case. Ongoing learning has to happen, and the schools need to be the ones that create spaces.
I think that Asim had some very good points about the reality of
Yes.
where we are. But I think that we have to acknowledge that because Islamic schools are relatively new phenomena, I mean, madaris have already been there for a long time. Islamic schools are a relatively new phenomenon in Pakistan. What we have been doing is we've just been following the old ways of the conventional schools. It's not working for them now, and it's definitely not working for us. So we need to rethink about, especially about professional development. I think that that's an area where we are extremely weak, because we're sending teachers to training courses and things like that. We find them by and large to be ineffective.
Yeah.
So we need to rethink how we do this. But it's something that we need a document, because that's a path. You don't have a map, you just don't know where to go.
Yeah. No, inshallah, I think it is a consideration, and I think at the same time to have a level of optimism in terms of how do we challenge the realities that we have currently. Is there any thoughts on the sister side? Any other questions? Okay. Yes.
My question is relatively simple.
Your question? no, these and these are the same. That's the why, the what, and the how. But what's in the book is different. And no, it's not a chronology. It's not, I mean, not for me at least. I've seen other scholars write it as, I've even seen ones that say why, what, how, and who, and I've seen another one. There's a few of them. What they're trying to say is that the word pedagogy just needs to be unpacked. When we wrote in the book, the way it was being written, we flipped how we wanted the students to go through the content. But what we found when we did the Islamic Teacher Education Program, interestingly enough, when students would register, or teachers would register for the program, all of them wanted to just register for this one or this one. Very few wanted to register for this, because they didn't see the value in the why, or the vision. When they finished the program, the feedback that we got was this was the most important course. It was also the most theoretical course, but the most important. And they felt like many teachers said that this is the course that gave them the language, the ideas, the concepts they needed in order for them to do these two. So it was actually, I think, a good thing in our program design when we designed this that we actually forced them to take all three. We didn't give them an option. We said that you have to take all three and you have to take it in this sequence of the why, what, and how. It was an experiment. For some it may have worked. I don't know if it worked for everyone, but that's the general feedback we got with the course. Yes?
So, the who in Islamic pedagogy?
What place is it?
Who in Islamic pedagogy?
Yeah, it's a critical piece. I spoke the other day. I went to a school and I was using a framework by a Christian scholar who's written about this as well, about pedagogy. Parker Palmer, I think Palmer, who has the why, what, how, and who. And he said that in Christian schools, the most important consideration for them is the who. Who is the Christian educator? And for us, i.e., who is the Muslim educator? What's gone into us as educators in terms of our own personal development, our own akhlaq, our own, self-reflection of ourselves. Because if we're, like I said, if we ourselves as educators don't walk into this process recognizing that, one, we're not finished, we're not perfect, we're not somehow mature enough, and we're still learning ourselves, if we don't have that attitude, then what's going to happen to the students? Right? Part of this modeling of students, part of this tarbiyah is for us to be constantly being reflective of ourselves. So, I'm just going to quickly finish this. We're at the end of page, or middle of page 6, where it says, a comprehensive pedagogy then must take into careful consideration each of the above three aspects. The challenge is that in the absence of a well-articulated and agreed upon why, or Islamic worldview related to education, the instructional method is left inconsistent across schools. So, again, going back to the point of inconsistency, both inconsistency across schools and inconsistency within schools is a major problem. Schools then rely on individual lead or exceptional teachers, but often have no professional development strategy to ensure all teachers within a school have a consistent and, more importantly, coherent, purposeful approach in teaching. Most Islamic schools generally share a common belief, vision, or identity, and a sense of religious responsibility. Most would agree that for pedagogy to be Islamic, it should, A, not contradict the aims and objectives and ethics contained in the Quran. Pedagogy should closely reflect an Islamic ethos based on revelation, the teachings and practices of the Prophet ﷺ, the intellectual and spiritual heritage of his followers. And that's what I mean by tradition. We define the tradition broadly by those that followed and have written both classical and contemporary works. And C, prove effective in developing the students' intellect, faith, morality and character, knowledge and practice, knowledge, skills, and physical abilities warranted by worldly responsibilities and duties. However, page 7, based on our research, most Islamic school educators and administrators would agree that their schools do not have access to an Islamic philosophy of education that sufficiently expounds and contextualizes the pedagogy. You will read the principle of that number. So you should have principle number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 and so on. You're reading that principle.
How much time do we have from the first?
3 minutes. I just said that. You need more than 3.
Do we have to go through these principles?
So if you're, yes, principle number 1. Once you read it, ask yourself how you would summarize it. So really, it's just a matter of summarizing what this principle is. Yes. So the manual. Okay, so your only task is to be able to summarize your principles.
Principle number 3. Our learning in this page number 33. Principle number 3. Teacher is the role model for the students. First thing is
Maybe we won't switch groups, but what we'll do is we'll just present within our groups on 3 questions. What, so what, now what? That means is what was this principle about? So what? Why is it important, if it's important? Why is it relevant, if it's relevant? Now what? What does this mean for us?
right.
Okay? What does it mean? Does it mean for us and our schools? So what? So what? Now what? And when you finish reading, that's what you'll be discussing in relation to your principle. We'll do that for about 5 or 7 minutes when you need some time to continue reading and finishing. When you finish, we'll share amongst our groups and have somebody present just from where you are. Okay? Quickly, if we can try to, we can aim to wrap up this conversation in about 5-7 minutes. 5 or 7 minutes more to talk about the what, so what, now what. Okay, 5 or 7 minutes. Sisters, 2 more minutes is okay? Do you need more time? In case you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Yes, we are done.
Yeah, okay. We're wrapping up as well. Stations, brothers on our side, and sisters are already done. We may not have completely finished it, but I think you probably got a good sense. The what, so what, and now what. It's going to be difficult to do this, but maybe we'll just do the brother side ourselves, and sisters, you do your own side. What we're going to do is each group will present for 3 minutes. About 3 minutes on the what, so what, now what. Going on the assumption that you've only read your principle. Right? So you've only read yours. So you need to give enough information, but not too much. Enough information to help the others understand what that principle was about. So why is it not important or relevant? And then the now what of what you might do with it. Yes?
We are doing jigsaw activity. Now we are supposed to go to our home groups.
We're not going to mix it up. I think we'll just present. I think it'll be easier to just present. So from where you are, that group will either stand or one person can stand and present. Sorry, we have a question.
It means that we will set 7 groups as per 7 principles, and each group will present, one group will present and other will listen.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you.
Yeah. And sorry, there's a question here.
There's sort of question, it's suggestion.
Suggestion.
Suggestion is that I would suggest that.
Will you?
My suggestion is that maybe we should have this exercise first in the gents part,
Right.
because you have a critical role to play, and the sister should watch that.
Okay.
And then maybe we can give them with the lunch extra 15 minutes or 20 minutes for their own exercise.
Okay.
So because these principles, they have the same principles, so I would suggest that they should watch you how to handle the groups, and they can then replicate the model before or after lunch.
Sure.
This is my suggestion.
Sure.
But as you like.
Thinking,
Not 7,
Yeah.
model 1.
Just model 1. Okay.
It may be laborious for them to listen to 7.
Right. Or the other way we could do it that I was thinking of, tell me what you think, is we'll have all of the groups on the brother side just present the what, and the sisters present the what, because the what is repetitive, right? So we get the summary, and then we'll turn the camera on and we'll hear about the now, the so what, and the now what from the sisters and the brothers group simultaneously at the same time, so that we can hear them, they can hear us, and we can have a joint conversation about that principle.
Yes, that's
So, is that okay? Okay, so sisters, if you can take 10 minutes and just go around the circle, just presenting the what. Each of the 7 groups present the what internally on your side. We will do the same, and in 10 minutes, we'll come back with you, and then we'll go through the so what and now what and our analysis of the actual principles. Sisters, is that okay?
Yes, we have to do in the mic. Okay? You are listening it or you are not?
No, right now, on your end, just present the what.
Without the mic.
Without the mic.
Without the mic.
Internally on your side, just share the what, the actual what this is about. And then we'll share the now what, so what, and now what across both groups. In 10 minutes, inshallah. Okay, that's good? Good?
So now what we'll share it internally, but like each group would present intent. So we
Yes.
start with one.
So we can
Yes.
just present over here, remember.
Yeah, just you.
Yeah.
Just let's start with group number 1. We'll go across to the 7. So what's it about? Just the what, right? Not the
Yes,
so
just the
what,
what.
not the now.
The principle one.
Our point main heading was, is conviction of the primary purpose and universal trust assigned to mankind. Basically, it's all about being Khalifatullah fil Ard and fulfilling your responsibility according to your designation. Maybe it's in ibadat, in mamlat. So as a teacher, the teacher must connect, at the end of the day, according to point number 1, the teacher must connect a child from this being a Khalifatullah fil Ard and his responsibilities, what needs to be done in this dunya and for akhirah. That's the crux of this point number 1. All the good things, all the bad things, the teacher is to tell and connect everything to being Khalifatullah fil Ard.
Perfect.
Any questions?
Perfect. We'll stop there. We'll get to the discussion. Just so you know, what we did here is, so we took one word that captured the principle. So for that first principle, the word intention or intend or purpose or trust could have been used, but it's sort of like, this is supposed to be a visual summary of the actual principles. So anyways, but perfect. Principle number 2.
So, एक स्कॉलर कहते हैं कि अमल बिला इल्म ज़लाल, अमल के इल्म के बगैर अमल इज़ ज़लाल, इज़ गुमराही. नॉलेज हमें लीड करती है ट्रूथ की तरफ, which is the central part of our religion, and action requires knowledge as well. So जैसे खलीफतुल्लाह की बात है, खलीफतुल्लाह तभी बन सकेगा जब उसके पास नॉलेज होगी. नॉलेज के बगैर वो खलीफतुल्लाह वाला काम नहीं कर सकता. So this is important part of teaching and खलीफा.
Perfect. Thank you.
Part was the learning environment is sacred, disciplined, caring, and functional. We believe that the learning environment is based upon 3 factors. Number 1, the environment of the classroom should be comfortable, flexible, and adjustable. Number 2, teacher is actually a role model. He should have good physical appearance, good character. He should practice what he preaches. He should be energetic and Sharia compliant. Number 3, students. Though the students should be courteous, respectful, cooperative, trusting, and supportive to each other, to their peers. So this is a triangle actually in learning environment. Thank you.
Well, we were given the 4th principle, and that was the responsibility to act upon what one learns and teaches. Well, I'll jump to the conclusion directly. Call of fail में तजाद नहीं होना चाहिए उस्ताद की, right? What teacher has learned and what he is teaching, he should be practicing that as well. And this is being advocated by so many examples and ahadith over here, and very well written draft. I must appreciate that too. Well, in this, the principle is that education is the fabric of society, and who is imparting education? That is the teacher. And if the teacher is only using words and he is not practicing it, so it cannot be effective at all, and he cannot penetrate that education among the students. So deed over words, that is the main emphasis of this principle, right? For teachers to lead by example. This is the core thing which he is emphasizing on. And Hazrat Umar Khattab Radhiyallahu Ta'ala anhu, he mentioned that, I'm telling you the crux of that hadith, that Prophet ﷺ never asked anyone to do anything which he himself did not practice, and he did not refrain anyone to do he did not stop anyone to do anything which he was not refrained himself. So whatever a teacher knows, he should be practicing it as well. Ilm and amal is the total crux of this principle.
Thank you. Number 5.
Actually, this deals with that how students, educational paradigm, how should they be assessed. So it's giving a framework that in Islam the assessment, the primary tool for assessment is self-assessment. And then it goes what are the pluses, but self-assessment, ihtisab, muhasaba, and then it gives the hadith that Allah is going to test, and Nabi Sallallahu has told us that self-assess yourself before the day you are going to be assessed. So for evaluation and assessment, the prime thing is self-evaluation and self-assessment. So this is what the principle talks about.
So there are different three that I did touch upon: aptitude, pace, and learning style. So aptitude basically is the skill set and knowledge set a current student acquires. So just we know what the current student has, and then what is learned and what is learning, and the skill set as well, like what kind of skills he possesses and what kind of skills he's learning. Second was pace. Pace is also based on guiding cognitive abilities and emotional distress or maybe some permanent disinterest. You have to understand each student how he how at what pace he normally allows in learning, observe. So you develop things like that. The third thing is the learning style. So the learning style basically is about the way human beings learn simply. So every the author points out every student has his own learning style. So maybe sometimes you have it either on paper, on blackboard, on writing, on multimedia, whatever it is. So you have to adopt the best effective way of you can learn to read. So these are the three things you can repeat: attitude, pace, and learning style.
Number 7.
Number 7 principle is actually about the enhanced interest of the students, and normally student gets bored by the formal way of teaching, by the formal way of instructions throughout the whole semester, throughout the whole decade, So this is how how bored they are with many of their classes. So there is addressed of Prophet peace upon him that he responded that the only thing preventing me from speaking to you every day is the fear that I might bore you. So boring is what the principle is about. We keep others attentive. That no students will get bored in class. Keep them attentive.
So we went around. I just mentioned when the camera, the video, the audio was off. So the slide that we have up here is really just key terms, or one term that's meant to capture the principle.
Sorry.
Yes.
Would you just kindly read those terms, because from the back of the room
sure.
we can't read them.
So for principle number 1, it's the word intend, what you intend. Champion for principle number 2, because the second principle is about the primacy of knowledge and seeking it. So to champion knowledge. The third principle, the learning environment is sacred, disciplined, caring, and functional. So we use the word care. Fourth principle, the responsibility to act upon what one learns and teaches. We use the word embody, to embody responsibility. The fifth one about religious responsibility for self-assessment. So we use the word assess. And the sixth, instruction is in accordance with students' aptitude, pace, and learning style. We use the word connect with students. And formal instruction is occasional, nurtures reflection, and evokes a sense of awe and wonder. We use the word intrigue. Okay, I think what we'll do now is, so we've gone over the what on both sides. Let's go back to group number 1 on both sides and hear about the so what and now what. And you can just summarize it as your so what and now what. And then we'll see if there's questions, if anyone has any questions about each one before we move to the next principle. So, brothers, would you like to start?
is very simple in one line. It's, if not, then it will be facade fillers. Right? So that this is so what. If not, then it will become facade fillers. And should I go now what also? Sure. Now what was that we should make the principles, the outcomes, and the rubrics and start implementing it through trainings and curriculum and whatever.
Sisters? Anything about the group that did the first principle on, and what is your so what and now what?
The thing is, so what exactly the way the brother was saying, कि फसाद हो जाएगा और हम इसको understand नहीं करेंगे. We need it, we badly need it, and now what? How do we have to approach with the why and what is answered? We needed it, and what we need we know it, but how is the problem? We're not able to reach there, and that's why we're here. How?
Okay, good. If I can just share a few thoughts before we move to the second principle. So, I just want to emphasize again that first of all, there's nothing in this entire document that's probably new to any of you. Right? There's nothing new. When you look at the Pakistan national standards in teaching, there's nothing new. It's not meant to be new. It's meant to be something that codifies the standard by which we want to operate or aim to achieve. So the document, and I mentioned this to a lot of people when we do these workshops, because I said we're not trying to educate ourselves on what our tradition says about Islamic pedagogy. We know that it's in the tradition. What we're trying to say is that if you draw out the principles, you have a set of standards that you can use as that guide. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, it's not perfect. It's a first attempt. Some of you may feel differently in terms of its relevance or not relevance or sequence or what's missing and so on. That's part of the process. But the reason why this first principle went first, I think is pretty clear. That intention, our niyyah, our recognition of our amana as educators needs to be not just words, but it has to be a lived experience. And by making it a standard or a principle, it becomes very, very central to our work. And one of the things that Sheikh Ramzi and I spoke about when we were first thinking of this, we said, think of this. When you looked at the Australian standards for teaching, and you looked at the Pakistan standards for teaching,
we feel it is important because in the current context we fear the questions of the students, and many of us lack the wisdom and knowledge to address those questions. And the way forward now what is, we think that we should promote the culture of questions as well as research work. Rather than just answering them there and then, we should promote a culture of asking them to research on it, and then we get together and then find out what the actual answer was.
Okay, and on the brother side?
So our so what was not fearing inquiry. अगर कोई सवाल करता है आपसे आके तो दीन जो है वो इससे मना नहीं करता कि आप सवाल नहीं कर सकते, बल्कि it strengthens the ईमान. और this is the human fitra कि वो सवाल करता है, वो why का सवाल करता है. और वो एक स्टडी भी उन्होंने मेंशन की है कि जब प्री स्कूलर why का सवाल करता है, this doesn't mean कि वो डिबेट करना चाहता है, बल्कि उसको एक्चुअल नॉलेज हासिल करना चाह रहा होता है कि इसके पीछे रीज़न क्या है. So don't kill the curiosity rather than nurture it in a right direction. And now what is understand the difference between revealed knowledge and acquired knowledge, and prioritize what to learn and when. Especially बच्चों को ये broader principles देना कि आपको क्या चीज़ आपके लिए क्या important है हासिल करना और क्या चीज़ आपके लिए beneficial नहीं. So इल्म नाफ़े वाली. And yes, sisters ने बता दिए कि questions को welcome करना और research पे focus करना.
So just again, a little bit of backstory behind this principle. If you noticed in the Australian standards and in the Pakistan standards, where was professional learning? At the bottom. was either the 6th, 7th, or 8th, or 9th principle or standard that they had. We know that right after intention comes the expectation to learn, embedded in our tradition, which all of you know better than I. But after intention comes the requirement for us to learn. So therefore, this also shows a distinction between the standards that are conventional for teaching practice and what we see as distinctions in our work. So yes, it's about inquiring and allowing students to ask questions and being open and dialogue and so on, but also it has to do with what we're doing as individual teachers for learning. So when this principle becomes front and center, it becomes high on the hierarchy scale, it's the first things that teachers see in our schools. First, we start with intention. Secondly, we start with the primacy of knowledge, of gaining knowledge and of seeking it constantly, and again, modeling it ourselves. So that was, again, part of the rationale. The third is...
Third is the learning environment. And like the what was that the teacher actually, her body language, her physical appearance will create the classroom environment. And why? So what is that because our Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam showed us how to do this. This is what Allah Ta'ala told him to do. There is a Quranic reference. Allah ने कहा कि आप नरम खून ना होते तो ये लोग आपकी तरफ ना आते.
And as I earlier mentioned, that this is the triangle between classroom, environment, teacher as a role model, and students being courteous and respectful. So what? This triangle makes teaching and learning process easier and effective to inculcate the vision and mission of the organization in the students. And now what? It is more or less already documented and applied in all the Islamic schools. But if it is applied, we should rethink, reinforce, train and motivate teachers to do so. And if it is not applied, we should apply it. Apply this principle. Thank you.
Again, a little bit of backstory behind this principle and the distinctions. The term sacred is very important here. Right? You wouldn't see the term sacred in a conventional set of teaching standards. But for it's a sacred act. And it's not mentioned in conventional, obviously, because it's not part of a conventional secular education system, but learning for us is a sacred act. So it doesn't mean that it can't be fun. It doesn't mean that it can't be engaging, but a recognition that, damaging a desk, if a student damages a desk or a student mistreats somebody or a student, we want them to understand that this is also a place of learning. And you have to have a level of reverence and respect for your teachers when you walk into the classroom. And your teacher has a level of appreciation and respect for you as a student who's come to their classroom. So that interplay is very important. So sacred is important. The other term around disciplined and caring we spoke a lot about because we talk a lot about classroom management. And there's been a lot of debate of whether we should be allowed to hit children or to discipline them strictly or strongly, whether that's part of our tradition or not part of our tradition. At this stage, I think what Sheikh Ramzi and what we tried to do here was we tried to put that it needs to be discipline, but your definition of discipline is, again, it's how you define discipline, how you define caring is really, it's going to be implemented in different ways. But there are aspects to this where the teacher's humility, the teacher's serenity, the teacher's pleasantness is all emphasized because of the impact. And then there's hadith there that support that explain that this is how the Prophet ﷺ was in teaching. But this principle is the one that's supposed to touch on issues of classroom management and the way that we support students. Number 4, on the sister side.
See, the students got a sixth sense for pluralism. They can detect living lies. They will reject a fake teacher in a spur of a moment, and so does its teaching. Now what? Teacher must therefore personify and preach the value of a good deed or word. In a nutshell, knowledge without action is like a tree without fruit. Remember the example of a kid when a mother along with her kid paid visit to Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam and told about her son's habit of having sweets. Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam replied and told her to come tomorrow because by then he himself was using sweets. In a nutshell, teacher is to be an embodiment of its teaching, walk the talk like.
Excellent.
Easy to act upon what one learns and teaches. So the objective of the educational activity सीखने का जो है उसका मकसद यही है कि इल्म और अमल आ जाए और उससे एक अच्छा माशरा जन्म लेता है. But in order for that to happen, the teacher really needs to model it and exemplify it. And this time is said by the sister from the other side, the emphasis is on the word of the day. Now, if that doesn't happen, so what? If that doesn't happen, then of course the education process does not reach its conclusion and it will not bear the fruit. That is the objective of it. So, जो उसका मकसद है वो हासिल नहीं होगा. तो उस मकसद को हासिल करने के लिए what should we do? First and foremost, the teacher should try his or her level best that she or he should be the best combination of ilm and amal. And not just inside the classroom but outside the classroom. The teacher should, in every kind of interaction that he or she has with whomever he or she gets in touch with, I mean that should reflect integrity and of course the Islamic other. Or उसके साथ साथ within the classroom, whenever we are teaching something and whenever we ensure that the student is getting an opportunity to learn, he or she should also get a display of that by the way of the model, और उसको मौका मिलना चाहिए कि उसका तजुर्बा करे. So that is the implication of it.
Thank you. Excellent. And again, the teacher acting on what they teach, but also to encourage the way that we structure our curriculum and our teaching. And that's what we're talking about when students say they're not finding Islamic studies relevant, or they're not finding Islamic studies engaging, or it's not speak to implement content. And for us as teachers to create opportunities for them to learn aspects of Islamic studies, but then also learn how to live it, take it to their world outside of the classroom. Okay, number 5, on the sister side.
Well, number 5 is self-assessment and accountability. And so what is related to train the ego to proceed towards the excellence, as Holy Prophet reported to have said that verily God has prescribed excellence in everything. And now what is that we should make assessment tools, and it could be like in the form of written feedback forms, be reflective inquiry on both of the ends, students and teacher. They can reflect and they can point out their mistakes and learn from the mistakes in both ends. So at the end of the day, the test and the examination will not be a burden on the students as well.
और ज़रूरी इसलिए है ये कि इंसान अपने मुहासबे से ही तरक्की कर सकता है. जब आदमी अपना मुहासबा कर रहा होता है तो उसकी तरक्की हो रही होती है, चाहे वो सलाहियतों के एतबार से हो, इस्तेदादों के एतबार से हो या ईमान के एतबार से हो. तो एक तो हमें अपना और हदीस है हासिल क़ब्ल अन तुहासबू, बार बार उस माशर का जो मुहासबा आने वाला है, जो आगे मुहासबा आने वाला है, उससे पहले अपनी तैयारी करनी. अब ये जो मुहासबा अहम है, इसमें दोनों चीज़ों को सामने रखना है जो इस प्रिंसिपल के अंदर बहुत वाज़ेह तौर पे हम बाज़ दफ़ा स्टूडेंट सेंटर्ड होके सारा मुहासबा स्टूडेंट का ही कर रहे होते हैं और अपना मुहासबा जो है ना वो सबका ऑडिट करते हैं अपने ऑडिट के अलावा. वो ये कह रहे हैं इस प्रिंसिपल के अंदर कि जैसे मैं बच्चों के लिए गोल सेट कर रहा हूँ, मैं अपनी ज़ात के लिए भी गोल सेट करूँगा. और जब मैं अपनी ज़ात के लिए गोल सेट करूँगा तो मैं क्लासरूम में आके उसको भी डिस्कस करूँगा ताकि वो इंकरेजिंग बने. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, मैंने तय किया कि भाई हर हफ्ते मैं एक नई किताब पढ़ूंगा. मैंने कहा भाई देखो मैंने ये नई किताब पढ़ ली है, तुम लोगों ने किस किसने पढ़ी है किताब. जब फिर इसी तरीके से जब मैं गोल सेट कर लूंगा मुहासबे के लिए तो उसको इवैल्यूएट भी करूंगा, लेकिन इवैल्यूएट इस तरह करूंगा कि ना उसमें तनकीद हो, मतलब क्रिटिसाइज नहीं करूंगा उसको, बल्कि उसको एप्रिशिएट करूंगा और उसको इवैल्यूएट इस तरह करूंगा कि अगर कोई गलती थी उस मुहासबे में उस बच्चे की जो उसने अपना गैप आइडेंटिफाई किया था या कोई चीज़ आइडेंटिफाई की थी तो मैं उसको बता दूंगा कि किस तरह करना है. अच्छा, ये कह रहे हैं इम्प्लीमेंटेशन में कि नाउ व्हाट के अंदर कि ये सिर्फ तालिब इल्म की सतह पे ना हो, ये मेरे रिफ्लेक्ट हो रहा हो क्लासरूम में भी, मेरे टीचर्स रूम में भी और मैनेजमेंट में भी. सबके सब अपना मुहासबे के एक अमल से गुजर रहे हों और अपना कोई गोल सेट कर रहे हो, जैसे प्रोसेस होता है ना जो लिखा हुआ है शयूख में प्रोसेस के मुशारता होगा, फिर मुराकबा होगा, फिर मुहासबा होगा, फिर मुआखजा होगा। आप अपने आप को कभी कभी जस्ट एडिट के सेल्फ पेनलाइज भी कर लेना चाहिए। सेल्फ पेनलाइज, आई हैव डिसाइडेड टू डू दिस थिंग बट कुडंट, ओके दिस इज पेनल्टी यू हैव टू पे। तो मुहासबा बुनियादी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है कि अपना मुहासबे से शुरू करें, टीचर और स्टूडेंट।
Principle, I feel like this one is the most important and transformative for our schools. Tomorrow we have an entire workshop on assessment and evaluation, and I'll speak more about this tomorrow. But at this stage, I'll say that what this principle does about muhasaba is it shifts the way we think about assessment and evaluation in our schools as well. And it gives a very big distinction of this whole thing around preparing students for exams, and preparing students for tests. Because that's not the end goal of an Islamic school. It's the end goal of a conventional school. In an Islamic school, we definitely want students to do well on tests, don't get me wrong. We want them to excel on exams, but it's not the end goal. The end goal is for them to have a sense of muhasabah, for them to have a sense of self-reflection, self-assessment. Because if you're in that constant sense of self-assessment, then you're never going to be perfect, but you're going to get closer towards what we're trying to get closer to. So this, I think, it really does shift our conceptions of assessment and evaluation in Islamic schools, and as was mentioned by both contributors, I think it has a lot of value, inshallah, hopefully. Number 6, on the sister side.
So far as this principle is concerned, it is about that instructions in accordance with the students' attitude, pace and learning style. Here I want to add the point that there must not be a communication gap between the teachers and the students. If the teacher is saying that he is not using the words upon the student's level, so that the fish cannot be kept up, no? The student, the teacher is saying all the time, and she is teacher-centered, and the students are not getting, so there is not a connection between the teacher and the student. So I think it's like in the hadith as well, that our Holy Prophet used to speak politely, secondly at a low pace, and he is not so fast enough that a learner cannot understand it. So according to the student's need, according to the student's aptitude, the teacher must, or the educator must guide the students according to the student's level. He must go with the words and use and the words, the selection of the words is such that it could be understand, like the students feel easy and delighted to understand the things. What's going on in the class, what's the topic going on in the class, it must be easy to understand. The students feel delighted at the end of the class. This is the principle. But this is all about the 6th principle, but I want to ask the question related to the principle of 3. Like I have checked that teachers are accountable and the classroom management is very good. When the teachers are there, the students are behaving very well. But
मैं एक स्टोरी थोड़ी सी शेयर करना चाहता हूँ। हमारे बहुत बड़े बुजुर्ग गुजरे हैं, मिर्जा मजहर जाना रहता, और he was वो ऐसे बुजुर्ग थे कि बहुत ही डेलिकेट, बहुत ही हसास और बहुत ही अदब आदाब वाले, और इस दर्जे के थे कि एक दफ़ा जब बादशाह आया, जो मुगल शाहजहां उनके पास आया, उसने पानी पिया और पानी पी के कटोरा जो है वो उल्टा रख दिया। तो उन्होंने कहा, उनके सर में दर्द हो गया, उन्होंने कहा कि जब तुम्हें ये कटोरा सीधा रखना नहीं आता तो मुमलिकत क्या चलाओगे। तो बॉस एक दिन उन्होंने अपने मुरीद से कहा कि अपने बच्चों को मुलाकात के लिए लेकर आना, अपने बच्चों को मिलाने के लिए आना। तो व्हाट ही डिड कि वो मुरीद, उसने कुछ 6 दिन तक उस बच्चों की ग्रूमिंग की कि शेख के पास जाके कैसे बैठा जाता है, और बताया कि ये नहीं करना, वो नहीं करना। ये न्यू कि भाई ये जो मिर्जा मजहर जाना रहमतुल्लाह देते हैं, सेंसिटिव बुजुर्ग हैं, डांट पड़ेगी। और वो फिर उसके बाद जो है वो उन बच्चों को लेकर उसके बाद चले गए। अब मिर्जा मजहर जाना रहमतुल्लाह ने बच्चों को देखा तो उनसे पूछा, नाम पूछा, और वो चेतियात की शक्ल में गर्दन नीचे किए हुए बैठे रहे। काफी देर तक जब 4-5 सवाल कर लिए तो उन्होंने उसको डांटा कि भाई मैंने कहा था बच्चे लेकर आना, फरिश्ते नहीं लेकर आना। तो बच्चे लेकर आने चाहिए थे, फरिश्ते क्यों लेकर आना। तो एक चीज सिस्टर की बात सही है लेकिन हमें यहाँ पे बैलेंस करना जरूरी होता है कि देखिए ये बच्चे हैं, स्टार्ट रियलाइज दिस थिंग, ये बच्चे हैं। आप सोचें अगर ये हम कमेंट कर रहे हैं तो हम उन बच्चों के बारे में क्या कहेंगे कि हुजूर पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम नमाज पढ़ रहे थे और हसनैन जो है वो उमामा के बारे में आता है, तो उमामा रज़ियल्लाहु ताला के बारे में कि वो ऊपर चढ़ जाती थी, हुजूर सजदे में होते थे और हुजूर सजदा लंबा कर देते थे, हसन रज़ियल्लाहु ताला, हुसैन रज़ियल्लाहु ताला। तो आई थिंक सो हमें कहीं पे दरमियान में बैलेंस करना पड़ेगा। हमें स्केरी इन्वायरमेंट भी नहीं क्रिएट करनी और बच्चों को उनके अंदर से बचपना भी नहीं छीनना।
वेरी गुड।
डोंट ट्राई टू स्टील जो उनका चाइल्डहुड है ना, जो उनका बचपना है वो मत छीने उनसे। हाँ यकीनन वो शोर करेंगे, वो स्क्रीमिंग करेंगे, अगर ये छीन लेंगे ना तो यही वो वजह है जो क्रिटिक्स है ना, जो जॉन हॉल्ट कहता है ना कि हमें तो बच्चों की स्क्रीमिंग से भी डिप्रेशन होता है, बच्चे रोते हैं तो हमें डिप्रेशन शुरू हो जाता है। ऐसा ना हो, बल्कि वी हैव टू बी इन द मिडिल। ये बात जरूर है कि आपने जो फरमाई कि भाई एहतिसाब अपना रखें और खुद हम बच्चों से पूछेंगे अच्छा भाई कोई फिर चीज बना लो, किसने टीचर को तंग किया था, किसने क्या किया था। लेकिन ये मिलिट्री कॉलेजेस में तो पॉसिबल है। दिस इज अ काइंड ऑफ अ थिंग व्हिच यू फाइंड इन द कैट कॉलेजेस, यू फाइंड इन द थिंग्स विद द बर्नआउट पब्लिक स्कूल, जहां पे क्योंकि स्केरी एनवायरनमेंट है ना, आपको पता है कि आपको एक अच्छी खासी जो है ना वो ड्रिल करनी पड़ जाएगी अगर आपको शोर करते हुए पाएंगे, यू हैव टू गो थ्रू राउंड एंड दिस। तो मेरे ख्याल में हमें इसका लिहाज रखना चाहिए, अपनी जो असेसमेंट है।
So, thank you for the contributions. I think they're important. Did we get the brothers on number 6?
No.
Okay.
Connect, sixth principle, and it is very relevant to our society and to the business of Islamic schools. Because Islamic schools are in fact very subsidized again, they are to compete with the conventional schooling systems, and this system has matured enough. So in order to and based on the fact that this principle is related to the principle which is core activity of any schooling system, connectivity between teacher and student. So it is very important. So connectivity is based on three things: aptitude, pace, and learning style. All are very relevant. All are very relevant to our society, because if we do not consider the aptitude of knowledge and skill of a student and the capacity of a student to learn, and we do not adopt the style that is effective, then naturally we will lose. It's very important, but how to get to it? So we think that we should train the trainers. We should train the trainers. Program is very important for Islamic schools. And secondly, we should develop we should standardize the Islamic schooling teaching. In fact, how to teach, and this methodology should be standardized. This methodology should be explicitly stated. How to teach, for example, how to use the whiteboards, how to use whether to use whiteboards or to use smart boards or whatever. So this is so what and now what from our side.
इसमें I don't know जैसे मैं ये समझता हूँ कि बाकी जैसी चीज़ों में कहीं ये एक फ़ायदा है and there is no नुकसान, there is no damage. But I think in this case, unfortunately, we have a lot of damage. I mean, if you don't do this, like एक साल है कि आप क्लास में जो है आपने जो बाकी स्टूडेंट्स हैं वो इस्लाम बता के दाखिल होते क्लासेस में इस्लाम बताते हैं, जैसे हैबिट लोग बड़ा होती है, दिस इज ओनली दे हैव एंड another student walking is a new student doesn't know about this. अगर उसकी जो पर्सनलाइज्ड टीचिंग नहीं होगी और असेस नहीं किया जाएगा कि व्हाई इज लाइक व्हाट इज डजंट नो अबाउट नो स्कूल और ये हैविंग, तो वो और एक दो और ऐसे आगे तो बाकी विषय खराब हो सकते हैं, बाकी वो इस्लाम नहीं कहता है मैं विषय इस्लाम ना करूँ। इट्स वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट दैट वी नीड टू इंटरकेट टीचर्स की ये सब चीज़ें हमें करनी है फॉर द इस्लामिक स्कूल, और हम ये नहीं करेंगे तो उसके बहुत रेपुटेशन बहुत बैड हो सकता है।
Excellent. I'll just build on that last point that you made, because the backstory to this principle, number 6, is that it's probably the most conventional principle that we have in the list of what you mentioned, that because it's not being done very well in Islamic schools in general, and 2, because the assumption is that this is not rooted in our tradition. And by making it explicit, it shows that it is rooted in our tradition, that taking into consideration students' aptitude, pace, and learning styles is something that our Prophet ﷺ was cognizant of in the moments of teaching that we've drawn out. So that's why number 6 was there. We'll close with number 7. I know we've gone a little bit over what we had intended for lunch, but we'll close here with number 7. So sisters, can we get
The lunch is at 1.
lunch is at 1? Perfect. Okay. So we're on schedule. So sisters, number 7.
Number 7 principle is formal instruction is occasional, and it should be, because if it does not happen, the students will get bored. As Abdullah ibn Mas'ud Raziyallahu anhu was asked of his students to teach every day, he responded, "The only thing preventing me from speaking to you every day is the fear that I might bore you." So it is very important for all of us to just not depend on formal instruction, but your teaching style should be more creative. And now what? We have to work on our teaching methodologies, that how we are teaching. Just do not depend on formal teaching. Include some activities in your teaching style so that the kids can engage fruitfully, or they are interested in Islamic studies as well.
Thank you. And on the brother side?
That formal instruction is not good in the sense if you are to continue it in the same way all the time, because it might lead the student to get bored, or in the final result to dropping out of the school. So what you have to do is you ask, this is what for teachers. Teachers should ask the students critic questions, or give him the different type of activities what you are doing from last 3 days, giving us the different activities. So it enhances the interest of the students, and it will lead them to show their performance gratefully.
Thank you. Good. Okay, so just to build again on what you principle, some people have interpreted, when you've written this, some people interpreted this by saying, so are you saying we shouldn't have school every day? And not saying that necessarily, but not saying that. It depends on the schooling system you're in, right? The idea that formal instruction should be occasional means that formal instruction should not be, like you mentioned, it needs to be not just lecture-based, but it has to have activities, opportunities to evoke wonder, give students an opportunity to use their imagination. Whether that means outside of the class experiences, or that means not having school every day, or it means free time, or it means activity-based learning, the implications are another conversation, which we'll get into in the afternoon. But at this stage, it does mean that it's not an imposition or a constant filling of the cup with knowledge, but an opportunity for students to actually appreciate the benefits and the reverence and the esteem of the knowledge that they're getting. So those are the 7 principles. I think what would be useful in the last couple of minutes, if you have any overall questions about the principles, because in the afternoon we'll be doing 2 things. After lunch we'll be looking at the implications and what this means for our practice, and then we'll be looking at whole school implementation of the principles. So, yeah, so we have, and then we'll come back if there's more on this side. So let's go with 2 from the brother side first.
Simple question. Is there a rationale to the sequence of the 7?
Yes,
so
there is.
intention clearly was first because intentions are first.
Yes.
Is there more you want to share?
As far as I know, I think there was a rationale with the sequence. I mean, I guess some of it gets arbitrary when you get to number 4, 5, 6. There's definitely a rationale at the outset of the intention and the primacy of knowledge, and the rest of them, it could probably be debated as to where they fit in.
जो आपने कहा कि ये जो लास्ट 2 मिनट 6 से
मेरा सवाल ये है कि इसमें ये बहुत आइडियल सिनेरियो भी है और यानी एक प्रिंसिपल भी है जिसकी बात हुई है और सबने इसके व्हाट सो व्हाट नाउ व्हाट पे भी बात की है, लेकिन एक इसकी इम्प्लिकेशंस पे जब बात होगी तो उस वक्त भी और अभी भी एक मैं एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिवली सोच रहा हूँ, तो मुझे ये हो रहा है कि एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिवली इसको ऐसा करने में जो चैलेंजेस आएंगे उन चैलेंजेस को नोट डाउन करना, वो क्या क्या चैलेंजेस आ सकते हैं और उसको ओवरकम करना को कैसे ओवरकम किया जा सकता है अगर इसको करना है वाकई। और अगर सिर्फ इसको नाउन फॉर्म में रखना है, वर्ड फॉर्म में नहीं लेके जाना, तो नाउन से वर्ब में कन्वर्ट करने के लिए जो चैलेंजेस हैं उसको कैसे हम ओवरकम करें।
But you're very right. To make this a living document that goes across your school is not going to be easy. Even if you took the Pakistan national standards, it's not going to be easy. Even if you take the Australian national standards, it's not going to be easy. Any standards. The benefit of using standards is that you don't have to create your own, right? But if you started by creating your own, that would be another task. That's another level. So the point that you're making, I think, is let's start with one framework, but then think about the challenges that it will take and the things that could go, the risks that could go wrong, and how to mitigate those risks as we implement. I think the battery on this is dying. We might need some new batteries. So, okay, sisters, any questions from your end? We have a few more on the brother side, but let's just take two from the sisters if you have any.
मैं सिर्फ एक कमेंट करना चाहूँगी जो अभी बात की गई उस पर, कि अगर एज अ टीचर हम इस प्रोफेशन में एंटर हो रहे हैं तो वी शुड नो आवर रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी, कि हमें ऑलरेडी पता है हम टीचिंग करने जा रहे हैं, तो वी हैव अ बिग रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी ऑन आवर शोल्डर्स, सो वी शुड नो कि हमें कैसे करना है, और हमें जो स्ट्रैटेजीज, ये 7 प्रिंसिपल्स दिए गए हैं, इनको देखते हुए हम उसे अप्लाई करने की कोशिश करें, नॉलेज खुद से गेन करने की कोशिश करें, तो शायद एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन पे इतना ज़्यादा बोझ नहीं आए और उन्हें इतने इश्यूज भी क्रिएट नहीं होंगे. इफ़ वी विल फील इट फ्रॉम इनसाइड, देन वी शुड गो फॉर टीचिंग.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for the comment. Any other questions or comments on the sister side? One more, and then we'll come back to the brothers.
अभी जो बात की गई है तो मैं उस हवाले से थोड़ी सी बात करना चाहूँगी. एक्चुअली जो हमारा ड्रॉबैक आता है वो इस लिहाज से भी आता है कि द मेजर थिंग विच वी आर सेइंग नाउडेज that everybody is just not everybody but most of the people are going for that they are going to get good opportunities, not for the benefits for the kids or the students. Actually they are thinking और उसको इस तरह कहेंगे कि डिग्रीज अचीव करना और अपने स्टैंडर्ड को ये करना है कि हाँ हायर स्टैंडर्ड पर आ गए हैं, लेकिन जो बेसिक जो पर्पस जो जिस पे हम सब जमा भी हुए हैं और सब सोच रहे हैं, बात कर रहे हैं कि बच्चों को के बेनिफिट हम कैसे लेके जाएंगे, तो उस ये ड्रॉबैक आ जाता है कि हम लोग डिग्रीज को हाई कर रहे हैं या फिर हम लोग कॉल और अमल का तजाद भी आ जाता है कि बातें हो रही है, इम्प्लीमेंटेशन की बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरत है. तो ये ड्रॉबैक बहुत आता है जिसकी वजह से शायद हम लोग अंडर कह लें कि जो हमें जो चीज़ हासिल हो जानी चाहिए थी या होनी चाहिए इस पर हम बात तो कर रहे हैं लेकिन अमल उस लिहाज से नहीं हो रहा, तो ये एक ड्रॉबैक है मेरा ओपिनियन.
Once again, thank you so much. My question is related to the derivation of these principles in the first place. मैं ये सोच रहा हूँ कि क्या ये काम इस्लामी तारीख में ऐसा कोई काम पहले भी हुआ है, और is this one of its own kind? I went through the endnotes, I went through the bibliography, I also went through the chapter that is on derivation, but has there been such an activity or an exercise before in Muslim history? And if yes, then how is this a bit different?
It's a great question. Here's my answer to that. In my travel, I can almost guarantee that there's something out there that's like this and probably better. We just haven't seen it. There's so much in the Islamic tradition that hasn't been translated. There's so much, from Turkey to Indonesia to Pakistan to other places, there's so many schools we don't have access to. And in the age that we live in, either it hasn't been translated, it hasn't been found, or it just hasn't been accessible, hasn't been put online. There's a whole slew of, I haven't seen anything of this nature, but I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. I'm sure that there are others. And the other thing is that I think as Asim Bhai mentioned earlier, he left, but a lot of schools have elements of this in your job descriptions, in your school philosophy, in your school vision, in your school mission, in your school values, in the documents of your school. You probably have elements of this, right? And then when we look at the standard documents for the national standard documents for teaching standards of different countries, there's elements of these things. So this is again one attempt. I think what's needed is either for schools to adopt this one or to create their own, but my argument is you need one. You need something. Whether you have it or you don't, you need to find it, and this is just something I would suggest you take it, you rip it apart, you change it, you fix it, you make it work for you, but you need some set of guiding standards or principles that shape your school. A vision statement doesn't cut it. A vision statement is a statement. The standards are it's like the metrics that you're going to use to actually self-assess whether your school is achieving those things. So there was one more on the other side.
Offering this program along with the conventional education. What I have seen over the years is that they have different levels set for the students doing HIFZ. In madrasa education, the HIFZ program is based according to the student's needs. But in the Islamic schools, the HIFZ programs are designed according to a framework. There are different levels. And at one level, if the student does not satisfy the needs of that specific level, they excuse him from continuing the HIFZ education. And then, if a student, I have seen students who have done their HIFZ, and immediately they're enrolled in the conventional education program, then in a matter of few years, they're not thorough with whatever they have done in HIFZ. So this is a weakness that I've seen in the HIFZ programs in Pakistan.
Challenges that we're facing. I think we're due for a lunch break. We've seen that, inshallah. So it's 1 o'clock. If we can take lunch and Dhuhr, we've got a lot to do in the afternoon. So can we aim to come back for 2 o'clock? Inshallah, is an hour sufficient? And then we can get right back into it. So Jazakallah khairan. We'll continue. The afternoon to micro level, and post will be macro level school-wide. Okay. Now as always, I have a plan of how I want to facilitate the afternoon. But after hearing some of the comments and questions and areas of need, I think I've made some adjustments. So we're going to try something slightly different, and I think inshallah, hopefully, it will be more directed to your context. What I wanted to do was I wanted to give out scenarios. Scenarios of Islamic pedagogy, challenges around Islamic pedagogy. But those scenarios are artificial. So then I thought, you know what, let's stop the scenarios I have, and let's create some scenarios. Okay? The sister, I can't remember, sorry sister, I don't know what your name is, but you had given a scenario before at the end, before we finished, where you said, in your classroom when the teacher leaves, the students, becomes a fish market, right? That's a good scenario. What I'd like you to do, each of us, is to create a scenario like that. Of your own classrooms. A scenario of the reality of your classroom that you find difficult, a challenge. So if you can take out a sheet of paper and half page, I have some paper here if we need. It can be scrap paper, and just write down a scenario like the one the sister shared of a challenge that you face, a reality that you face. It could be a reality of, let's call it disengagement. For those of us that attended the workshop on engagement, a challenge of disengagement. Okay, students aren't listening, students aren't paying attention, students aren't embodying akhlaq, whatever. But describe it. Describe it like the way the sister did. This is the grade, these are my students, this is the context, the type of school, and I have this group of students, and every time I walk out, it becomes a fish market. And this is what the fish market looks like. Describe it. So 2 or 3 sentences, not long. it doesn't even have to be sentences, just point form, it's for yourself really. But to describe a scenario that you find challenging, that reflects the realities of the schools that we're in. Okay? Sisters, are we clear on that? So each of us is going to take 5 minutes to think of and write down a scenario. Point form, words, sentences, as you like, that reminds you of a scenario of a classroom challenge you were experiencing. Okay? So 5 minutes, please. Just letting you know. Wrapping up your scenario, here's what we're going to do. And Sister Tayyiba is going to help us facilitate the activity on the sister side, and I will facilitate it on the brother side. So you should all have a scenario in front of you that you've written up that describes disengagement and or something that we find challenging in our school context. Anybody want to share their scenario? Can I hear one or two on the brother side? Can we hear one or two scenarios?
A group of 3 to 4 girls, led by one girl in a high-end Islamic school, class 7, has started to show aggression against their weaker classmates as well as against their teachers. Parents have been informed after counseling, but not working. Symptoms for the peers, the girls are bullying and heckling, and for teachers, they're showing disobedience and violence.
Okay, thank you. Excellent. Really deep. Good. Another example from the other side. I think we had one here.
मेरी जो मिसाल है वो स्पेसिफिक स्कूल से रिलेटेड नहीं है, मैं क्योंकि मदरसे की दर्स निज़ामी जो ट्रेडिशनल वो भी लेकिन इस्लामिक पेडागोजी के तहत आता है ग्रेड सब्जेक्ट। तो मुझे थोड़े दिन पहले एक तजर्बा हुआ, मैंने खुद मैं एक क्लास को पढ़ा रहा था, मैं फिफ्थ पढ़ाता हूँ वहाँ पर। तो मैं रोयत हिलाल के मसले पर बात कर रहा था और उसमें ये बात कर रहा था कि इसमें हमें थोड़ा सा टॉलरेंस लेवल हमारा बड़ा कम है और हमारे ड्राइंग रूम डिस्कशंस का मौजू बना रहता है कि चांद नजर आया था नहीं आया था। इस पर बात करते हुए फिर मैंने थोड़ा सा पढ़ाते हुए मैंने ये किया कि के लोगों की जो टेंडेंसी है कि जल्दी चांद को अनाउंस कर देना और शहादतों का इम्कान ना होने के बावजूद रोज़ा का अलग हो जाना की बड़ी एक इंतशार की फिजा पाकिस्तान में पैदा होती है, इसको मैंने बड़ा स्ट्रॉन्गली उस पर रद्द किया। और मुझे रद्द करते वक्त और ये बताते वक्त कोई शुबा नहीं हो रहा था कि मुझे कोई ऐसा उसमें कोई मसला आएगा, कोई बैकफायर करेगी। लेकिन वहाँ पर स्टूडेंट्स में खुद पिशावर के चंद स्टूडेंट्स मौजूद थे और डाई हार्ड फॉलोवर्स और दोज स्कॉलर्स हु अनाउंस चांद इन पिशावर, तो उनको ये चीज़ बहुत ज़ोर से लगी और उन्होंने उसी वक्त इतने उसको ध्यान है कि आपको अगर मदरसे का कल्चर का मालूम हो कि बहुत आसानी से टीचर्स का जितना अदब मदारिस में होता है उतना अदब स्कूल्स में नहीं होता है और रिसेंटमेंट का इजहार नहीं करते हैं। लेकिन उन्होंने बड़ा खुल के रिसेंटमेंट का इजहार मेरे सामने किया और कहा कि हमें आपकी बात बहुत बुरी लगी है और उसकी वजह ये है कि आप अगर एकेडमिकली इसको रद्द करते हैं तो ज़्यादा अच्छा था। हमें लगा कि यू हैव बिकम बायस्ड और आप उन उलमा को आपने तहकीक हमें लगी और आपने यहाँ के उलमा को थोड़ा सा ज़्यादा मुअज़्ज़ज़ बना दिया, तो ये तरीका हमें आपका बिल्कुल अच्छा नहीं लगा और मुझे उस वक्त बैकफुट पर आना हुआ क्योंकि मुझे भी लगा वाकई जब मैंने पीछे देखा कि मेरे उस वक्त उस एकेडमिक चीज़ को बताते वक्त मेरा रवैया बायस्ड हो गया था, तो जिसकी वजह से मुझे वो आधा घंटा मैनेज करना पानी पीना पड़ा मुझे उस मसले में। तो ये एक मेरा तजुर्बा रहता है।
You don't need solutions right now, just good problems. Okay, we'll stop there. I'm sure we've got a lot of good ones on the other side. Any sisters want to share one or two, and then we're going to get to the activity. This is just the warm-up. One or two from the sister side, please. I'm really glad that I dumped my... We're going to go outside. Sisters are going to go outside on their side, behind the divider over there, and we'll be outside over here on this side. Okay? There'll be two circles. An inner circle and an outer circle. Okay? And in the circle, if I'm in the inner circle, there'll be somebody in front of me, and then there'll be somebody beside me, and it'll be like this. Okay? So a full circle, somebody on the outside, and somebody on the inside. Two circles. One side of the circle will be sharing their scenario. So if I'm standing in front of you, it will be like this. I'm going to share my scenario. and tell you the same scenario that I just wrote down. And you are going to take your principles of Islamic pedagogy and, thinking of the 7 principles, suggest ways that I might use some of the principles, one or more of the 7 principles, to be able to resolve or support this scenario. Okay? How might I use one of these 7 principles to support this scenario? You'll have 3 minutes. So in 3 minutes, I will share my scenario. You will give me feedback saying, you know, maybe principle number 1 over here is a really good principle because, etc., etc., etc. I would consider a strategy like this. Right? And if not, it's at least a good 3-minute discussion. Then I'm going to say, switch. I'm going to move, and the other person on the outside will stay where they are. I will shift, and as I shift, I will share my scenario with someone new, and that new person will give me advice. And then I'll shift again after 3 minutes. So by the end of it, I'm not going to go around the whole room, obviously, sharing my scenario. But we'll go maybe 3 or 4 or 5 times, and that one person will get 5 different pieces of advice on their scenario. Okay? So we'll do that for about 15 minutes. Sisters, well, yeah, about 3 times 5, about 15, 20 minutes.
So both circles will be facing each other?
Yes, so the 2 circles are facing, when I'm outside with you, I'll show you, and I've explained to Sister Tayyiba, but 2 circles facing each other. One side, I'll tell you which one will share their scenario. The other side will be giving advice using the principles of Islamic thought. You don't have to take it unless if you know them, but the idea is to think through the 7 principles and their evidences and so on as a way to provide suggestions to the scenario. You good with that? Everyone's okay with it? Okay, and at one point, Sister Tayyiba, if it's going really well and we feel like, you know, the scenarios are really deep, we may actually flip sides, have other people share their scenarios, and then we'll go. So, Sister Tayyiba, maybe what we could do is in about, it's 2:20, so maybe in about 15 or 20 minutes, if we could just meet somewhere in between, and I'll just tell you whether we should continue for a bit or not, and then we'll, so in about 15 minutes, if you could just meet me somewhere out there, and then we'll discuss whether to continue it or not. Okay, any questions on the sister side before we go outside? We're good? Okay, brothers, you're...
चले, वैसे तो आपका काम होता है कि आपको सवाल अगर आपसे कोई सवाल है तो आपके घर में क्या बात है ये मैं पहले ये है कि मैं जाके जिला क्लास में मौजूद के मुशावरा बच्चे बताते हैं आई थिंक आउट नहीं बोल हम फादर आ गया
या वो मोटिवेशन है आप जो है जो भी चीज़ निकल रही है उससे कनेक्ट करना यू मस्ट कनेक्ट मेरे ख्याल से बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज़ है वरना ये कि बोरिंग बताओ समझेगा ये
Why am I here? Why am I learning? This is the first principle के against इसको हम लोग engage करें. चौथी में दूसरा point है. वो आगे पानी बोतल में निकल गई 80 गिलास
Was the exercise beneficial? Do you feel like you gained some good advice? Excellent. Somebody found the solution without it. Somebody found the solution without it. Sorry, what was that? You can't see the camera? You can't see it? You can see it. Great. Okay. Hopefully you got some heat from sun. You're standing a little bit, smiling, laughing. It's good that you're sitting because you have to stand up again. So I have two questions for you. Sisters, you probably have a board over there as well. So on your whiteboard, somebody can write, Sister Tayyiba, you can write, toughest scenario, best advice. From your conversations, if you can come up, grab a marker, everybody needs to come up eventually, find some space on the board, and write down, not the whole scenario, but a word, a key word, of the scenario or the best advice that you heard. Either the toughest scenario, one that you said, wow, I don't know what to say to this, or a really good piece of advice that you gave. So don't all rush up here at the same time, but you need to come get a marker and start writing.
Can you make it without?
Sorry?
Can you make it without?
Can you
Repeat? So I put two, that doesn't mean you guys have to keep sitting though. You can come up. I put two things on the board, toughest scenario or best advice. So outside you were sharing your scenarios. When you heard somebody else's scenario that you thought was really tough, if you think it was a really complex one, can you please come and put one or two keywords that describe the scenario, 2 or 3 keywords. And if you gained some really good advice about your scenario, somebody said something that you thought was really beneficial, can you come and just put the best advice that you received? And unless there's a question, is there a question or?
No, I
so,
will come on.
So then come, just come. You just don't have to wait. No hands, just come on.
Everyone should come.
All at the same time.
We don't have enough marker.
That's okay. That'll make you stand and not sit. The whole objective is for you to not be sitting. So everyone needs to stand. You can wait for your turn, find a marker. You can fight for markers. Only use board markers. Don't use a pen. That's not good. Don't write on that board, on that screen. Sisters, are you okay then with it?
You're okay? Yes, sticking it somewhere.
Okay, yeah, on a piece of paper or
Yes,
on a whiteboard. Tough scenarios that the sisters have. Unless there's other comments on the sister side as well. But good. This is good advice. If I can just give one comment in relation to the sister's problem and in relation to what Ihtisab has shared. Look, there's one-off cases like these that are really, really complex and difficult scenarios. The honest truth is, I think, at least, that it's a systemic problem in that not all students are meant for school. And the fact that we forced students into a conventional schooling structure, we're now beginning to see that, and it's just not in the scenario of students acting out, it's also in the students who are getting bullied, or the students who are overachieving and they're being held back. There's multiple scenarios like this. But what it means, it shows us that one size does not fit all. One size does not fit all. And you know, whatever principles, you're right, whatever principles we use, we try, this is a lot of theory, it's a lot of, you know, it's a lot of ideas and concepts. But in reality, the scenarios that you face are sometimes very, very complex, extremely tough, but we have to also acknowledge that it may not be solved by principles. It might just be solved by, and again, not saying the student should leave, but the reality is that maybe that student, or many of us students, should actually not be in that context. Maybe that child would benefit from a different schooling or educational context. Let's hear the other two scenarios, and then I just want to push forward, because I know time is of the essence.
Yes, the scenario is that we teach the students of teenagers, and in the books of Pakistan Studies, Urdu, there is a material regarding the Islamic culture and different policies, government policies, but the application in our society, we cannot see that. So the students are asking for that. There's a question from the student side that you are teaching us all the things, but where are they? Where we can see in the society, their application is not here. So it's the clash from the from our side, so from the society side, so the students cannot see the actual examples, real examples of life.
Good point. Good scenario to raise. Third one from the sister side. Sisters,
सिंगल पेरेंट एक लड़की है और मतलब माँ छोटी घर चली गई है, बच्ची अकेली है, घर पे काम भी करती है,
उसके लिए मैंने क्या किया, I started my exam first and telling them this that whoever comes should pay some. So
conversations, please. I know you're deep into it. Some groups are finished. Sisters, are you almost? If you're not, can you try to run up, please? We want to take a break for chai soon, about 5 or 7 minutes. I'd like to hear. Okay, good. We're done on the brother side. Sisters, are you ready? Brothers?
Yes, we are ready.
Perfect. Okay. I'd like to just go around from each group, hear one. I'd like to hear one of your best proactive strategies. I don't have the microphone. Where's the microphone? Oh. Okay. Brothers?
Just one?
Just one?
Yep. On the 6.1.6 studies, we would involve student in curriculum design.
Okay. Excellent. Can you pass on the microphone, please? Sisters, can you see the whiteboard?
no, we cannot. Close up parents also.
So the first one you heard was involve students in curriculum design. Excellent. And just keep it short. Perfect, just like that. Yes.
डेली बेसिस पे स्टूडेंट्स को वाई जो पढ़ाया जा रहा है उसके वाई में इन्वॉल्व किया जाए। आज हम पढ़ने लगे तो इन्वॉल्व स्टूडेंट इन वाई ऑफ व्हाट दे आर लर्निंग ऑन डेली बेसिस, ऑन लेक्चर बेसिस।
Okay, next group on the brother side.
Rigorous training of teachers, which should involve the why of teaching, the why of life, the why of knowledge, and how knowledge helps achieve the purpose of life.
Excellent. Next group on the brother side.
Setting classroom rules with the discussion of the students.
Excellent.
Between the students should themselves set the rules for the classroom.
Excellent. Next group. So we'll get started. I think some of the brothers are still trickling in. And sisters, I'm hoping you're back and settled. Sisters, are we ready to start?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Okay, so we've got an hour left, which is not a lot of time to what we need to do. So your goals. We're going to start thinking about whole school implementation now. Assuming, obviously, that the principles are, you're satisfied with the principles. I mean, you know, if you want to adjust them and change them, that's something you can do later. But For now, let's go on the assumption that the principles are good to go as a starting point. The objective we have, sisters, hopefully you can see the whiteboard. The objective we have is making the principles of Islamic pedagogy a living document. Making it a living document. Those are the key words. Okay? I think it was rightfully pointed out earlier that these documents can easily become dormant. Just they sit on the desk. They sit on the desk. No one ever looks at them. They sit on the shelf. No one knows what they are. The question for us is, how do we make that a living document? Okay? At a school level, we already talked about classroom level. So at a school level, how do we make it a living document? I'd like you to develop an action plan. PIP stands for Principles of Islamic Pedagogy. A PIP action plan. I'm going to give you a blank sheet of paper in groups, and on that action plan, I'd like you to divide the sheet into two. Left side and right side. The left side, I'd like you to brainstorm a process. I just put, it can be a circle, it can be list, it can be diagram. I'd like to see a diagram process of how you're going to take this from a document throughout the different elements of the school. And I just mentioned things here like the vision or the recruitment or induction, enrollment, orientation, policy, professional development, job descriptions, evaluation, you get the idea. Lots of different, there's lots. That you can't squeeze all of it in, I get that. But a high level process of how you see this policy in your school or your group of schools going through from paper to action. Okay? So you'll have a visual here on the left side, and then on the right side you're going to answer a few critical questions. One is, how are you going to measure or evaluate implementation? So you have this process, but how are you going to evaluate or measure the implementation of it? That's something you have to discuss. Who must champion or take lead and on this implementation strategy? It might be multiple stakeholders, and how? And you just put point form. You don't need essays, just point form. And what risks must you mitigate and how? So what can potentially go wrong? What can potentially go wrong in your process, your plan? And how might you mitigate? How might you address those? And other, because you might have another issue that you think is also important or more.
And then like connecting our job descriptions to those 7 principles, and then designing observation form according to it, and then professional development leading from that information.
Exactly. So you're not looking at individual principles. You're doing exactly what you said, which is you're looking at the principles as a whole, as a document, and asking yourself all of the different key elements in your school that you feel this should be weaved into. So, like you mentioned, professional development, and I think you mentioned induction or observation rubric. All of those pieces. Just write down. You don't just write down the actual words and then link them or list them. However, of where, as an outsider, or as a parent, or somebody would see where does the principles of Islamic pedagogy sort of come up? Where does it arise? Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And they're requesting that if the board can be focused.
Yeah, no problem.
We just want to take permission if we can draw the map here and then.
For the teachers' training and evaluation, we started the discussion with the standards. So do we need to set the standards for the spiritual uplift of the teachers as well? Should we have something like that?
You could, but for this exercise, we're looking at high-level, macro, school-wide initiatives. So starters are things that you would do at a classroom level, and maybe at a professional development level. But I think at this stage, we're looking at what are the high-level aspects of the schools where principles of Islamic pedagogy need to be ingrained, like the induction process or the recruitment process. Maybe if the principles of Islamic pedagogy are incorporated into the recruitment, then you'll start asking different questions to your teachers, the potential teachers who are applying to tuition. So we're just looking for keywords like recruitment or professional development or things like that.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? I'm going to step outside, sisters, but I'll come back in a few minutes and I'll just tell you when I'm back in case you have questions. That's someone inside.
All groups are inside.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we have some inside, some outside. That's okay. This by 4:30, and then what the brothers are going to be doing is a gallery walk, like we did yesterday. We'll likely do it outside. So we're going to post our posters around the wall. Each group will present for 3 minutes, and the rest of us will critique it for 3 minutes, and then we'll go through each one. So if you can do the same by starting at 4:30 or before, if you're wrapped up. If you have any questions, let me know in the next minute before I head over something.
Attitude.
Wonderful. Okay.
कुछ साथी आपके साथ होंगे, बाकी most of the people are not with you. They are not aligned. They are not, आपके साथ वो sync नहीं होते. तो फिर naturally आप जितने बड़े लीडर हैं, आप अप्लाई तो आपकी जो टीम ने कर.
एक चैलेंज तो यही हो गया.
So
लोग आपके साथ जो है वो
वो निकालना उसको लगाए, फिर हम उसके ऊपर चैलेंजेस दे देते हैं, ठीक है? Right?
मेरे भाई
छोड़ें यार, अभी हो गया,
शुरू हो गया, डिसीजन हो गया. मेरा भी ये ख्याल था. Does this make sense?
theoretically it makes sense, लेकिन इसको देखना पड़ेगा कि इसमें वो जाहिर बात इसमें और डिटेल तो डालनी पड़ेगी.
ऐसा होता है.
हाँ होता है, क्यों नहीं होता है. साउथ डिस्ट्रिक्ट तो वो ब्यूटी की जो ब्यूटी है ना उसके पास होती है. मतलब अगर आप रखें, ये देख लेंगे चैलेंज ये है, चैलेंज ये होता है कि प्रिंसिपल ये समझता है कि आई एम 100%
इसको पढ़ा लें. प्रोसेस कंप्लीट हो गया. अब हमने ये बताना है एवेल्यूएट हम बच्चों को कैसे करें.
हाउ यू क्या बात तो कर लिया आपने कि आपने कहा कि
What risk must we mitigate and how? What are the risks?
रिस्क क्या हो सकता है?
सबने लगा दिए policy की the vision and reinforcing it.
All of your chart papers to our side. So if you give us all of your chart papers, what we're going to do is put your chart papers on the wall here, and then we'll zoom in the camera. So when you present it, we get to see your chart paper, and you get to see your chart paper, and then you can explain it. If that makes sense. Right? So otherwise, you'd be presenting and we're not seeing your chart paper. So.
I think maybe some people need more time.
Okay, I mean it doesn't have to be perfect. So if we could finish off your last sentences, and if it's not complete, that's okay.
Okay.
I rushed the brothers too. They're upset with me, but that's okay.
Okay.
So sisters, if you can send over your chart papers, please. I'm here.
There is no signal.
Oh, there's no signal. Let's get started because time is limited. We've got very little time and we probably have a lot of groups. So we'll start on the brother's side until the sisters' papers come over. It's really a summary of the process of how you're going to make the principles of Islamic pedagogy a living document, and maybe hinting at some of the risks in question, because time is limited. So the question can come from the brothers or the sisters' side, whoever says something. Since we have the sisters one, we'll put them here. Perfect.
I
Okay.
think this will work out really easily. The camera may not be focusing well or whatever.
So put all the brothers, all of them here. So 3 minutes. Sisters, can you see? We're over here.
We cannot.
Okay.
We cannot.
You cannot see that?
No.
We move this closer?
There are no signals.
Oh.
On the projector.
Just push the power button on the projector.
ये फोकस है मगर वहाँ स्टैंड बाय पे कर
Projector is on.
So you can see it now?
No.
Okay, and then we have, but the sisters can't see us.
So we're waiting to upload this.
Okay, so what I'd suggest is why don't we start with the brothers groups and at least start presenting, they can hear if they can't see it. So we can just, because time is of the essence. So let's, we'll start with the brothers groups.
Okay, we can see you.
Oh,
Alhamdulillah.
wonderful.
present इधर कर रहे
Let's still have the brothers. Okay, okay, so you can see this. Sisters, you can see the first group?
Want to zoom in?
Yeah, can you zoom? We want to move this forward or just zoom in?
ये zoom है full?
जी जी
Full zoom है?
जी
दिख रहा है और करीब ना हो?
बस ठीक है
Readable है? Mike?
Okay. So this is for our group, the implementation of the PIP strategy, assuming this is an existing mature Islamic school, which has a documented vision and strategy. With the premise that the management has gone on the workshop, this is what they would do. Assuming, let's say, the COO went to the workshop, the first thing is that he or one of his team members is going to undertake a feasibility study and then get board approval for the study. Once the approval is in place, then a team, which is the champion, a shura committee led by the COO, but with reps across stakeholders. The stakeholders we're assuming are the students, the teachers, the BOD, the management. Is that covered? I believe so. So with reps across stakeholders led by one person, presumably the COO, that committee, once the feasibility study has been done and approval has been taken, is going to do an integration plan to integrate the PIP into the existing vision and strategy documents of the company. You'll see this is the first column, which is the management. We do these 3 steps, we move over to the second column, which is teachers. We train the teachers, then we empower them to implement the PIP in their own classroom. Right? So this both gives them the ownership and gets the best practices out because they're closest to the students. That's the teachers column. Then we move from teachers to the students column. Within those classrooms, just as we train the teachers educate the students on the PIP, and in turn they empower those students to implement the PIP into their own learning. At which stage the students are ready to demonstrate the outcomes of the PIP across the campus. So suddenly now the parents and the owners of the school see the results of the investment that they've made as a community. This is an iterative process. We evaluate the final step at each level, student, teacher, and management, through review meetings and survey feedback. That's our process.
Question, if anyone has a question. Brothers, can we put a sisters group up next? Sisters, if that group can present, hopefully you can see your handwriting and he's at pen. Hopefully you can see it. Can you zoom in? Okay, sisters, no questions for the first group. Sisters, would you like to present to whoever's is up, this one?
Assalamu alaikum. This is ours. First of all, we'll set a vision, right, in accordance with the principles we have discussed. Then obviously we'll communicate to the heads, right, and we'll do teachers training accordingly because this is something we lack. And then we'll implement the planning, right, and we'll take follow, right? Moving to details. Taking follow-up is the key. See, we are done with the planning. We have done each and everything. But we are not taking the follow-up. Can create problems, right? Once the management has done the planning and all, we will make sure that the pertinent head is taking the evaluation done. Alright, risk may arise. It can be academic, accidental, or behavioral. And when it comes to academic, it can be like of slow learners. For them, we can arrange some remedial classes. In case of emergencies, some fire situation can erupt, right? And we should have that ready beforehand in order to deal with that problem. Then the behavioral issue. See, student counseling can be done, a psychologist, external help can be taken in this regard. Thank you.
Excellent. Any questions from the brother side or sister side? Only going to be lived if you consider it at a micro and a macro level. And the strategies that are being put out here, in terms of the strategy, the strategic planning of bringing a document to practice or to a lived experience is actually really critical. So thank you for those that are sharing.
Assalamu alaikum. What we started off with was that, again, as mentioned in the group previous just from the guys, that we're assuming it's an established school with the established vision, mission, values. And the first thing what we would do is that we would consult a focus group, we would constitute a focus group of stakeholders that would include parents, students, staff, and community. Obviously, in the staff, we do include some high-level staff members as well. We would need to take ownership as well. So, from that focus group, we would discuss all of this, the presentations that we've gone through, discuss the document with them, make sure that all of them are comfortable with it, and then we would discuss how do we implement it. For the implementation, it would be divided into three sort of headings: people, program, and place. So, for people, when we talk about people, we're talking about all of the people that are in the focus group. So we're also talking about parents, we're also talking about students, we're also talking about staff members, right? Not so much the community members. So within that, we're talking about induction. So we would have policies on how do we cascade this in induction, whether it is the hiring of teachers, whether it is hiring of admin staff, whether it is intake of students. So this also is going to be kept in that. We would have a professional development plan based on these criteria for the admin and the teachers, as well as instructional program for the students. And also performance evaluation for all of these would be built in. For program, we're talking about curriculum design specifically. So within that, we would see if there are available programs, whatever we can use from available programs that are aligned with our vision and the PIP, we would use those. If we don't have anything like that, then we would have to design them. And then we would then move on to planning, implementation, and assessment of those programs. Finally, place, then we would make sure that we would work on having the environment around us developed so that those needs are met. Efficient utilization of the facilities that we have, maintaining those facilities and improving them when needed. That takes care of this part. How do we, the second part of the thing was, how do we measure, evaluate implementation? So the curriculum objectives and these things would be written on one side, would be a rubric, and we'll have the PIP 7.
When we all know, accept that there is a risk involved, but what you plan to do?
Okay, I think I mentioned some of those. I think that as far as these risks are concerned, we said it's expensive, so that we'll have to figure out some alternative methods of financing. Reputation at stake, well, that's something that because we've got the stakeholders on board, they will communicate to the relevant stakeholders that this is a new program and we'll give it a shot. teachers' retainability, we said that either we have to pay them better or we have to have other perks to retain them. And finally, interference from higher authorities and founders. We just, because some of them were on board at the stakeholders thing, at that point they hopefully will understand. But this is always a real danger. It's something that, you know, even when you decide on something, sometimes people backtrack. But so that's it.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Can we get one sisters group, and then this will be the last one. Please present.
First, process vision, cultivating lifelong learner. Use that vision must be shared, clear to all. Induction must be related to vision. Proper PD sessions for teachers. Evaluation should be done for the following example, like dress code, attitude, lesson plan. Job description according to their vision of the school. Engaging of parents through workshop, self-assessment, and curriculum aligned with vision. Now that through observation by coordinators and feedback of parents matters a lot, and class assessment outcomes, and who must champion this, that this is the answer of that the responsible person should report to the director on daily basis. Risk we cannot find appropriate teachers aligned with vision, clashes between the teachers and administration, frequently changes of teachers. From the parent side, sometimes they have some issues when they don't get the clear vision of vision and mission of the school.
Excellent, excellent. One question? Anybody have a question? On the sister side or brother side? Okay, so inshallah, let's close here. Jazakallah khairan for everyone who put the effort into developing these plans. We'll try to take pictures of all of them and share them across all of us, because there's a lot of value in this. So just to recap, we started off this morning speaking about the need for principled thinking, talking about standards. We then transitioned to a framework, not the framework, but a framework of principles of Islamic pedagogy, providing us with a distinction from what already exists. And then we said to ourselves, how do we apply that framework of principles into our micro classroom level with our inside-outside circles, started looking at classroom-based problems and potential solutions, and we ended off with the macro level, high level, in terms of how do we take principles across the entire school ethos. So hopefully in this workshop you've gained not just the actual content, but the considerations at both levels, micro and macro, of how this sort of a thinking can add some level of renewal to our schools. If there's one thing that we leave with, it's probably the risks, recognizing that, as you mentioned, as you've all mentioned in the risks, we have ideals that we want to implement, but it's not going to be easy. And this sort of a process is not just going to be time intensive, but financially sometimes intensive.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullah. On behalf of the Learning Circle and STARS, I welcome you to the workshop today, Principles of Islamic Pedagogy. Inshallah, it will be very interesting and a very learning experience with Dr. Nadeem Memon. Dr. Nadeem Memon joins us from Australia. He founded the ITEP program, the Islamic Teacher Education Program in Canada, and he ran it successfully for a number of years. He is a PhD in education from the University of Toronto, Canada. At the moment, he is a professor at the University of Southern Adelaide at the Institute of Islamic Thought, author of a few books on Islamic education and student learning, student participation. Today we start with Tilawat with Brother Mahmood.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم صدق الله العظيم.
Hope everyone is doing well. Before we get started, can I just get a sense of how many of us are joining one of these workshops for the first time? First time. And on the sister side, can I get a sense of how many sisters are here for the first time?
There are many people, I think more than 7.
Okay.
And they are still coming.
Okay. And approximately how many sisters do we have on that side?
26 now.
Okay, that's fine.
But I think more will be coming.
Sure. Okay. And I think we've got some more coming on our side as well. Good. All right. So today's session is entitled Principles of Islamic Pedagogy. And we're going to go through a number of key issues in terms of what we mean by Islamic pedagogy. The purpose of this topic is that we have schools that we've established as Islamic schools or as schools that embed values into the Islamic values into their school context. But the argument that I'm trying to put forward is that we have had an overemphasis on what we're teaching, i.e. the content, over how we're teaching it. And what I mean by that is I feel that for a long time we have assumed that if you are a Muslim, a believer, and you're working in a context where you are teaching Islam, therefore you would know how to teach in a way that is Islamic. And I think what we're trying to say here is that when we're thinking about schools, there's a few important components to the school. There's the curriculum, there's the pedagogical approach, the way that we teach, there's the environment, there's the assessment, and all of these different pieces. But the teaching methodology is one aspect that we have not really put enough emphasis on. So a lot of what we're going to speak about today is the actual process of teaching and what it is that makes that teaching Islamic. The outcomes that I'm hoping, inshallah, we gain after this, we're going to be together, inshallah, for the full day, so it's going to be a lot of discussions and activities. But the outcome, inshallah, is that you're going to gain a framework of 7 principles of Islamic pedagogy. And all of you have the document in front of you, the booklet that's there.
But these are the synonyms.
Good question. We're going to.
Calculated.
Sorry, the question was: is there a difference between pedagogy and teaching methodologies? Right. So allow me to leave that for a second. Great question, but inshallah we will unpack it very soon. Another question? Yes.
Islam are really taking it throughout our scholars till today, what they have defined.
Right. So the question, sisters, was Islamic pedagogy. Are we taking it from the seerah? And again, I'll address that as we go, if you don't mind. Any other initial questions that I can? Okay. All right. Good. Inshallah, we'll get into it. All of these are good questions, and keep them coming, and I'll try to, inshallah, beat them in. So I'd like to begin with a question. What are standards? What are standards? Standards are A standard is an authoritative principle or a rule that usually implies a model for guidance or evaluation. A standard is a rule or a principle that is drawn out by which we abide by. So we have standards. We have standards for what's appropriate. We have standards for what's not appropriate. We have standards for institutions. We have standards that are formal and that are informal. If I asked, what are standards of teaching? What would you say? What are standards of teaching here in Pakistan? What are standards of teaching in your school? Anyone? Can you think of a standard? One standard? Yes?
No hitting allowed.
No hitting allowed. Okay. That's a standard. Another standard?
No bad words.
No bad words. Yes?
So plan first, then deliver.
It's what, sir?
Plan first, then deliver.
Plan first, then deliver. Okay.
Ethical.
Ethical. Sisters, feel free to jump in.
Give respect to the students.
Sorry?
Give respect to the students as well.
Give respect to students. I'll repeat on the microphone so sisters can hear it. So we don't go around the microphone. But sisters, feel. So what is a standard in your school? What are teaching standards?
Engaging learners.
Engaging learners.
A perfect blend of contemporary and Islamic education.
Sorry?
A perfect blend of contemporary and Islamic education.
A perfect blend of contemporary and Islamic education is a standard, okay? Okay. Standards are something that you live by.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
To connect with the creator of the universe, this is the main standard of our academy.
Okay. To connect to the creator of the universe, okay?
Homeworks, evaluations, periodic
To make
evaluations.
lifelong learners.
Okay, on the brother side we heard homework, evaluations. On the sister side, lifelong learners. Others? Do we have standards in Pakistan for teaching?
Checking, evaluation, parents teacher meeting.
Mike Collins.
Okay, so your school has standards
Yes.
for
We have-
teaching.
Yes, the experienced faculty staff design them for the new ones,
Okay.
unexperienced one.
So your school has standards for if there's new teachers coming in,
Yes.
induction, they go through understanding of standards. If there's experienced teachers, they have standards to uphold. Any other examples? Do schools have standards?
We do have HR manual standards.
HR manual standards, okay? I'm saying teaching standards, standards for the quality of teaching. Any other schools that have standards for the quality of teaching?
Observation forms for teachers, that's done twice a year.
Okay. That's, yeah, observation forms, if you have an observation form in your school, that's likely based on standards. And the standards that your school feels is important. Now, Mufti Saad just stepped out, but you raised a good point. It's a living document. Do we have, sisters, do you have, the standards in the schools that you are in, sisters, are the standards a living document? What I mean by a living document, are they used? If I walked into a school as a parent, said I want to register my child, what are your teaching standards? Would your teachers know? Would the principals know the standards are? Any thoughts?
In our school, standard of the teaching is basically in the written form, and we must know what, being a teacher, what should we do in the class, in the staff room, in the premises. So I suppose that these are the standards. What should we do with our students, and the staff members, and the management? This is the standard.
Right.
What we have to do is this standard.
But are those standards for teaching?
Yeah, for teaching also.
Excellent. Excellent. So we have standards for teaching, and in some cases, those standards are being used. In other cases, they may or may not be being used. Allow me to share a few documents which I thought were interesting. I found a document Anyone seen it? Anyone on the sister side? Have you seen this document? National Professional Standards for Teachers in Pakistan?
No.
No. Okay. That's telling. Okay, that's extremely telling. That if we have national professional standards for teachers in Pakistan, this is a UNESCO document that I guess was worked on, I think it was 2008, but it shows that there are the need for standards. And I'll explain how the standards are developed, because I think this is very interesting. So first, you see here, there's 10 overarching standards. Standard number 1 is about what a teacher knows in terms of subject matter knowledge. And then human growth and development, knowledge of Islamic ethical values and social life skills, instructional planning and strategies, assessment, learning environment, effective communication, collaboration, continuous professional development, and teaching of English. Now, I would argue, first of all, that these are more topics than standards. But when you read the document further, it does become standard. So that's fine. So you have a list of areas that are national standards for teaching, right? The fact that it's not a living document, and the fact that, for example, the schools that you all are in may not be actually referring to this regularly, there's a bit of a disconnect, but that's fine. The fact that it exists is a start. It's a very good start, actually. So let me just give you a breakdown of one of them. Let's take a good one, like instructional planning strategies. Okay. So if you look at standard number 4, instructional planning strategies, it says that the actual standard is that teachers understand instructional planning, design long-term and short-term plans based upon knowledge of subject matter, students, community, curriculum goals, and employ a variety of developmentally appropriate strategies in order to promote critical thinking, problem solving, and performance skills of all learners. And then it breaks it down. Now, for those of you that came to the workshop on the first day we did the workshop, on the 3rd, you remember we talked about KSA, knowledge, skills, and attitudes? This document is actually broken down into KSAs, which is interesting. Knowledge, and then they call it dispositions, which is attitudes, and they have skills. So they break down each standard. This is the overall standard up here. And then they break it down into knowledge, what knowledge a teacher must have in relation to that standard, what disposition or attitude a teacher must have, and then what skills a teacher must have in relation to that standard. Right? That's interesting. If you were to do a comparison of the Pakistan national standards and the Australian and a few others, which I've done in the past, there's a lot of similarity. Like this one on engaging professional learning, I think is number 9 in the Pakistan or 10. And this one, engaging professional colleagues, community, it's somewhere in there as well. And they're all kind of sequenced. This is about who students are, and then about content, and then about planning. So there's relative consistency in most national teaching standards. The critical piece is the question of what I asked is it a living document? And I'll share one interesting piece in the Australian, so this is how they break it down. They've broken it down as rubrics. Many of you are probably familiar with rubrics, but they've said, so they take the standard. The standard number 1 is know your students and how they learn. Know your students and how they learn. But they've broken it down into sub focus areas. 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. And each one speaks about a different aspect of knowing your students. And then they broke it, they created like an evaluation that if you were to do this, what would a really strong graduate, proficient, highly accomplished, and lead teacher look like? So you're an early graduate, and if you were trying to achieve this standard, this is what it would look like in your classroom. So then when you come into the classroom to evaluate or to assess a teacher based on the standard, you have a gradation of what it looks like. Right? Just on a side note, a lot of my work in North America and in Australia is based on this standard here, 1.3, which is that students with diverse linguistic, cultural and religious and socioeconomic backgrounds to support them. So the work that often people like myself do in places like Canada or Australia is around the religious backgrounds, to ensure that teachers, if you're a non-Muslim teacher or you're teaching in a conventional public school, how do you accommodate, support the strengths and needs of Muslim students in your schools? And the reason why people like myself have a voice or have credibility or have authority in what we're saying is because it's in the national standards. So no one in Australia can say, why are you trying to teach about Islamic values and Muslim perspectives and Muslim students and their needs in a public school? We're a public school, we're a secular space. And I say, hold on, it's in standard 1.3. It's mandated by the government for you as a good teacher to be able to acknowledge the religious values and beliefs and perspectives of every student, if they happen to see their religion.
The headings like graduate,
Excuse me, sir.
higher company.
Sorry, 1 second, we'll give the microphone.
Well, can you kindly further elaborate these further headings of graduate, profession, highly accomplished, and well, I would like you to further explain these headings of graduate, profession, highly accomplished, and lead. I understood from that do we have different standards for an immature teacher and who has little experience and a master? So do they have different standards and expectations? What does it mean? Graduate, proficient, and highly accomplished, and lead.
Yeah, good question. No, it's not different standards, but it's a gradation of the same standard. For an early graduate or a proficient and early, like you have 3 to 5 years of experience, or you're a very experienced teacher, or a very experienced teacher, you should be able to do it at this level. So this is, and that doesn't mean that because you're a graduate, you're at this level. You could be somebody who graduated, and you might be at this level on this particular standard, right? All it is the way to, a rubric is a way to assess, either self-assess or to be assessed by somebody to say where you are on this topic, on this standard. So for example, understand how students learn. Somebody at the basic level would demonstrate knowledge and understanding of research into how students learn and the implications for teaching. Somebody at this level would say, you're leading processes to evaluate the effectiveness of teaching programs using research and workplace knowledge and about how students learn. So this person is doing the standard almost like a school principal by evaluating effectiveness of other programs and teachers, and this person is sort of basically just demonstrating it in the classroom. Yes?
So which means there is one teacher Amina and while her evaluation being done or observation being done, she might fit into somewhere into a lead section, somewhere into the junior section. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah. If there's a particular teacher, they may fit into one of these.
Or is it the criteria that few would fit in this, few would fit in this, few would fit in this because they have this qualification and this number of experience?
Well, you can look at this multiple ways. This rubric can either be used as a form of assessment, or it can be used as a form of a lead. If you're in a leadership position in a school, your responsibility may be these aspects. So this also creates your job description. Right? Of this is what you should be doing, and gives somebody clarity. But then, based on a job description, that then leads into your evaluation as well.
You can extract KPIs from these as well.
Exactly. You can extract key performance indicators from those. You can break it down further, but the power of standards is that it gives you the flexibility to use it in multiple ways.
So what you showed earlier also about standards, I think most of the schools are already doing it, but in the name of job description, because those things are all there in JDs.
Maybe. I would assume that in a job description, you wouldn't be this detailed. I would assume. Like, you're not going to speak about the specifics of learning environments and assessment and evaluation and how students learn. You could probably say general things that we were looking for.
Rubrics won't be there, but the general standards will be there.
Possibly. I guess what I'm trying to say is if you have a set of standards, right, for the school, that should influence, yes, your job descriptions, yes, your performance evaluation of teachers, yes, the self-evaluation of teachers, and it should also be embedded in the constant professional development of teachers. So when, for example, you do professional development, for those of you that are principals or school leaders, and you think to yourself, I'm going to send 8 of my teachers to this workshop. How do you determine that? But if you had standards, and you say, this is a particular standard we're currently working on, and this workshop, this series of workshops is going to help you support this particular standard, or this particular area of professional learning, then you have a justification. So it also links, so a lot of what schools do is they'll have the standards, the document of your standards, link it to your job description, link it to your performance evaluation of your school, and then you link it to your professional learning map of what upskilling does each teacher need based on the standards that we have. So this year, your priority is these 3, and your priority is these 3, and each person has their own priorities because we're all different teachers, we all have different levels of experience, right? But it all links back to this standards document, right? Which is your foundation. Now my argument is that I don't think we have something like this. One, for Islamic schools, that's designed for Islamic schooling, and 2, that is based on an Islamic pedagogy. And we're going to
even know this Pakistani standard. So they Australian know their standard, or they work there according to their standard.
They do, yeah. Over there, from what I've seen, because it's mandated that every school they have a performance evaluation process for their teachers. That performance evaluation for teachers is linked to the standards. So their standards are called AITSL standards, and AITSL, AICSL. And when you walk into a school and you ask them, are you familiar with AITSL standards? They'll say yes. We're at least aware of it, if not deeply familiar with it. But it's kind of like if you want to be a teacher, this is what it's going to take to be an Australian teacher. Right? So you have to. The other link to all of this is that the professional development, the actual Bachelor of Education they're doing is based on these standards. Then you get a job. To get a job and get teacher accreditation, you have to understand these standards. There's an assessment for getting your accreditation. Then you walk into a school and your performance evaluation and your job description is linked to these standards. So there's multiple points that this document is made into a living document. That doesn't mean they're doing it well. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm just saying that it's at least built into the system. It's built in systematically. Okay. So, question. I'd like you to, now that I've kind of gone over standards, I'll just go up to the actual, would you prefer if I leave the Pakistan ones up or the Australian ones? Which one? Pakistan. So let me just go to these. So I'm going to leave these 10 up here. Okay. Now, as I mentioned, I think some of these are still topics, but it's a start. It gives you a topic. You can see the continuous professional development, collaboration, partnerships. There's a lot of linkages. The question I'd like to ask you is, what would standards in an Islamic school be? Madrasa, a school with an Islamic vision, what would the standards look like? What would they look like differently? So if you could take 5 minutes, turn to a few people beside you, around you, and ask yourselves, what would the standards look like in an Islamic school? And I'll keep both of these up so you can see them as you're having the discussion. But
can you increase the size?
Yeah, I can do that. Okay, so 5 minutes, inshallah. What would the standards look like in an Islamic school? On both sides, can we please wrap up our discussions? Okay, wonderful. Sisters, can we get from your side first, maybe 3 examples of what teaching standards should be? Again, teaching, not school, but teaching standards that are Islamic or designed for our schools, Islamic schools.
I think the first standard should be, of course, a shared vision with the entire staff. That what is the purpose of the school? Why are you here? Why are we hiring you? What do we expect from you as a teacher teaching in this particular organization? There should be a vision that needs to be shared. Okay? And if it's like, for example, at Generations School, we have the shared vision that we have is the dua of Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? رَبِّ هَبْ بِحُكْمَ وَالْحِكْمِ بِالصَّالِحِينَ وَاجْعَلْنِي لِسَانَ صِدْقٍ فِي الْآخِرِينَ وَاجْعَلْنِي مِنْ وَرَثَةِ جَنَّةِ النَّعِيمِ. This is the dua that we base our curriculum or our teaching standards on. So like a shared vision, basically that's what I'm trying to say. A shared vision with all the teachers. Why are we teaching and where do we want to go and how are we going to achieve that? A basic shared vision with all the teachers.
Excellent. Another example? From the sister side?
Awareness and implementation of stages of child development as given by Quran and Sunnah.
Okay, awareness. Okay, one more.
The standard should be like that the students can learn by teachers the ethical and moral values, how to survive in the society, but balancing the deen and dunya both.
Okay, and from the brother side, can we get some examples? Yes, at the back.
across subjects, every teacher should have a basic level of understanding of Islam. Whether it's a geography teacher or a math teacher, in Islamic school, every teacher should have a basic level of understanding of Islam. Everyone should have those as well. No.
Okay.
So everything.
One more? Two more?
Practicing and making students practicing through motivation.
Practicing through motivation?
Yes.
Okay. And one more.
While teaching, we should not employ any dance or music to educate students, unlike other schools. Any haram activity should not be involved to educate children.
Okay. With standards, as you can see, from school to school, you'll have the opportunity to develop standards that mean something to your school. Right? And like the sister said rightfully so at the beginning, that there needs to be a shared vision or purpose. Once you have that shared vision or purpose within your school, these standards become clear as to how you're going to achieve that vision or purpose. And you create standards for your school that align to that vision or purpose, which will be different than another school. So these standards we have for teaching here may be broad enough for national standards, but then you can create standards from within that are localized or that are contextualized for your particular school. And as we mentioned, the process of developing standards is extremely critical because it does touch upon more than just, it touches upon all aspects of the school. So let me move on quickly onto a few other things. When we're talking, so the focus for today, when we're talking about standards and for the rest of the day, knowledge, skills, dispositions, all the different things that come up in teaching. So everything from classroom management, expectations, professional responsibilities, assessment, technology, learning environments, learning styles, feedback. These are all different elements that go into teaching. And when you look at the standards, the Australian standards or the Pakistan national standards for teaching, these are all somewhere embedded. Like when you begin to read the document, you'll realize that all of these things are embedded, even the use of technology or learning environments or the types of feedback and praise that's given to students, whether a school supports the idea of giving feedback and praise or not, how to plan lessons, the types of instruction, whether it's direct instruction or indirect instruction. All of these are different elements that comprise of the aspects of teaching. But I want to emphasize that what we're also seeing is a paradigm shift in education. And when we're talking about teaching practices, we're talking about teaching practices that have shifted from a more teacher-centered, testing, evaluation-based model to one that's based more on reflective practice. This process that we're going through right now, one of the reasons we're talking about standards and why standards can influence our schools is because part of professional development for teachers today is about renewing our schools by ourselves. We moved to a model where we said, we don't need somebody to come from outside. We can create a professional community within our school that will begin to look at how we can renew the school internally. Classroom management before was far more strict, discipline-based. We've now moved towards more holistic understanding of the children that's based on the socio-cultural needs of learners. And for those of us that were here yesterday, we spoke a lot about funds of knowledge. We spoke a lot about the concept of push out and drop out. Looking at the student needs has become something that's far more prominent in the way we shape our standards. We've moved from a fixed core curriculum to a curriculum that's changing. And as you can see, even for those of you that attended the first workshop, we spoke a lot about curriculum in terms of how we can adapt curriculum, how we can change curriculum, as opposed to being something that's just being passed on. And then curriculum and teaching is value-free, unchanging, and timeless. What this means is previously we thought in education generally was that you had a curriculum and this was set in stone, and that somebody shaped it, but they must have been right. And now we're saying, let's decide who shaped it. Let's understand who shaped it and how it was shaped, and what the values were that shaped it, because we may not agree with those. And recognizing that even within Islamic schools, like we said, you can have many different types of Islamic schools, and we're going to have different emphases. And we moved away from teaching that was very allowing children to have cell phones in the school, or why are you allowing girls to wear nail polish, or why is there music in the school, or so on and so forth, right? And suddenly the school takes its policy. And the principal says, yeah, you know what? No more of this. So who has power? Who has power? Do students have a choice? Do students have a voice? And do parents have a voice? Do the educators have, do the teachers have a voice? Because we as educators in schools also are very concerned about the way things are happening in our schools. We might be concerned if, for example, a student does something inappropriate. You find a student who is exchanging phone numbers, a young man is exchanging phone numbers with a girl, and you say, I'm going to get rid of this student. This student should not be in our school. He's misbehaving. This is multiple time we've warned him. Let's kick him out of our school. And then other teachers say, hold on. If you kick him out of the school, we lose him. If we keep him in the school, we have a chance to support him. And you have a division in terms of the voice between the principal or the school leadership and the teachers. So who has a voice in how the school is being shaped? This is why it's very important when we're thinking about power and we're thinking about voice. It's to determine when you're looking at values, vision, and standards. These are really high-arcing pieces that influence the entire school ethos. But whose voices and whose opinions are being accepted or at the table. And the third aspect is privilege. How many students can attend Islamic schools? And what I mean by that is, have we shaped an Islamic school in a way where we've allowed enough students to have access to the same level of education? So do all students have an opportunity, or is it just some students? And what I mean by that is, if you have large Islamic schools and you're doing an excellent job, but the fees are very high, was it accessible? If the school does not have access to allowing students to come into the school for whatever reason, because of distance, because of fees, because of requirements around grades, because of entrance exams, is it accessible? So access is also very critical, because that shapes the standards of the school and it shapes the purpose and the vision of the school. Not to say that one's right or wrong, but to say these are questions that should be going through our mind around values, power, and privilege, and how that shapes the schooling experience. Now, getting into instruction, because when we're thinking about values, power, and privilege, I'd like to emphasize, question? Yes?
Would we be discussing all this later on, or you're just running through it right now?
I'm running through it right now because this is going to get us